Chapter 581. Camp 2. Fulfill your end of the deal. He leaned forward slightly, his gaze glinting in the dim candlelight. And this city is yours to rule. Varenthia. A city where power belonged to those ruthless enough to take it. A city built on ambition, betrayal, and control. And if he played his role perfectly, if he bent to this bastard's will for just a little longer, he would have it. His own domain. His own rule. Aldrich's fingers pressed harder against the table. His gaze locked on the flickering candlelight as it cast long, shifting shadows over the map. This city is yours to rule. That was the sole reason he had betrayed House Velterin. Not honor. Not duty. Not the weight of tradition shackled to his name. Power. His own. Not borrowed from some decrepit bloodline. Not handed down by fate or family name. His own rule carved out with his own hands. His lips curled into something that was neither a smirk nor a frown, just a quiet, bitter edge. He had never liked being a knight. Never liked kneeling before lords whose only claim to power was the sheer dumb luck of their birth. He had spent his youth sharpening his blade, honing his instincts, rising to 5-star awakened through sheer effort, through battle after battle, while they sat in gilded halls, sipping wine and sneering down at those who actually fought to uphold their name. And yet, in the end, what had it amounted to? Serving him, that arrogant bastard, that pathetic excuse for a noble, Marquis Ilarion Velterin's son. A fool who was destined to lose the battle for air before it had even begun. A man who wore his surname like a badge of untouchable authority, despite possessing neither the skill nor the mind to wield it properly. Aldrich had been his right hand, his sword, his shield. And for what? To waste his talents fighting battles orchestrated by men who had never held a blade in their lives? To protect a noble whose victories were only ever written in ink, signed in backroom deals made by old men who feared losing their grasp on power? TCH. He had risen on his own merit. A knight feared and respected, not for his name, but for his ability. And still they had expected him to bend the knee. He inhaled sharply, forcing the familiar anger to settle. No more. Aldrich Velterin had died the day he walked away from the battlefield. The day he left behind a crumbling house, a doomed heir, and a legacy that had never meant a damn thing to him. And in 6 months he would have something real, something earned. His city, his rule, his power. No gods, no kings, no noble-blooded fools standing above him. Aldrich exhaled slowly, his fingers tapping once against the map before he reached for the dagger at his side. With a swift, deliberate motion, he stabbed it into the parchment, right over the heart of Varenthia. This time he wasn't fighting for someone else. This time he wasn't kneeling. This time, when he won, it would all belong to him. Aldrich inhaled slowly, suppressing the instinct to bare his teeth like a cornered wolf. Instead, he kept his voice even, his expression carefully measured. "It will be dealt with," he said at last. A statement, promise, a dismissal. He met the figure's gaze without hesitation, knowing full well how much the other man enjoyed watching him bristle under the weight of his own choices. Everything was under control. The figure's smirk widened ever so slightly. Not amusement, satisfaction. "I'll hold you to that," he murmured. He gave a final glance at the map before turning away, his steps light, deliberate, and full of that infuriating ease that came with knowing he held the leash. 6 months, Aldrich. He didn't wait for a response. He never did. Aldrich remained still, the air in the room thick with unspoken tension even as the figure disappeared into the halls beyond. The candlelight flickered against the polished steel of his gauntlets, reflecting the faint tremor in his fingers as he pressed them against the table. Not from fear, from rage. A bitter, seething rage that settled deep in his bones like a sickness he had long since stopped trying to cure. He had traded one master for another, but at least this one would give him something real in return. Aldrich exhaled, forcing his fingers to relax, forcing his mind to sharpen past the instinct to sink into old wounds. 6 months. He would endure this for 6 more months, and then Varenthia would be his. But before he could let the thought settle, bang! The doors to the chamber burst open. A soldier staggered inside, breathless, his uniform smeared with soot, his chest heaving from exertion. "Commander!" Aldrich's head snapped up, his expression instantly sharpening. "What is it?" he demanded, already knowing it wouldn't be anything good. The soldier sucked in a desperate breath. "Draven's men, he swallowed hard. "They're attacking the Black Veil's holdings. Systematically. Warehouses, strongholds, supply routes. It's not a raid. It's a war." Aldrich's pulse remained steady, but his eyes darkened. His fingers curled into fists as he straightened, his presence towering over the exhausted messenger. "Where are the losses?" The soldier coughed, then quickly continued. "One of our main warehouses was taken in a single sweep. Fire and steel, no survivors. Other key locations have been hit in different parts of the city. Coordinated attacks. Viral's group set fire to the western supply caches and Soren." The man hesitated, grimacing. "Soren went straight through the front door of the Veil's dens. He's tearing through them like a war beast." Aldrich's lips pressed into a thin line. Not unexpected. He knew this city well. He knew Draven well. Too well. This wasn't a show of force. This was a message. And if Draven was behind it, then it meant he wasn't planning to stop. Aldrich exhaled sharply. "Send word to." Aldrich's fingers twitched against the map, his jaw tight as he processed the information. His men were waiting, breathless, expecting orders, expecting rage. Instead, Aldrich exhaled slowly, the tension in his shoulders shifting into something more deliberate, more controlled. "Call Ryzek. Call Vern. Call Salos." The room stilled, his hidden blades, the ones he had kept out of sight for this very reason. Each of them was a 5-star awakened. Each of them had survived battles that should have killed them, and each of them had been waiting, watching for a reason to be unleashed. The soldier hesitated before nodding and bolting from the chamber, eager to follow the command. Aldrich rolled his shoulders, his muscles tensing with a familiar, predatory anticipation. "I'm preparing to move out." The informant paled slightly. "I'm not sitting in this room while the city moves against me." Aldrich cut in, his tone sharp, final. "Draven and his bastards think they can dictate the pace of this war? No." His smirk twitched, but there was no amusement in it. "They must think I, Aldrich, am a joke." His fingers tapped once against the table. "But something doesn't make sense. Where had they found the courage? Draven wasn't an idiot. Viral and Soren weren't reckless. This wasn't the kind of move you made unless you knew you had the means to back it up. But that was the problem. They didn't." Aldrich had been tracking every high-level fighter entering the city. He had the artifact, a gift from the very man who had given him his path to power. It ensured that no strong newcomers could slip into Varenthia without his knowledge. And as of this moment, no one had entered. Not a single new 6-star awakened. Not a single warrior of rank. So where the hell did they get the confidence to start this fight? Aldrich's smirk twitched wider, a slow breath escaping through his nose. Either they've lost their damn minds. He flexed his fingers, the heat of battle already thrumming in his blood. His eyes gleamed in the candlelight, the weight of his blade pressing familiar against his hip. Or they're shooting their last arrow. He chuckled, shaking his head. If it's the latter. A slow, deliberate step forward. The room around him felt smaller now, like the city itself had shrunk, its streets already carved out for the war to come. Then this. He exhaled, a quiet, dangerous amusement slipping into his voice. Isn't a bad opportunity to wipe them out completely. Chapter 582. Who are you? Isn't a bad opportunity to wipe them out completely. The figure, who had remained silent as Aldrich gave his orders, finally spoke. His voice was calm, unreadable. Is that the case? A pause. Then, a slight tilt of the head, as if peering through him. Are you sure the artifact didn't detect anyone? Aldrich's smirk didn't waver. No, it didn't. Not a single powerful fighter had entered Varenthia. Not one. The artifact would have picked up even the faintest trace of high-tier energy the moment they crossed into the city's limits. And yet, A strange sensation crawled over his skin. Not a presence. Not a killing intent. Something probing. Aldrich's breath slowed. His muscles tightened instinctively as the feeling dug into him, like a needle threading through his thoughts. It wasn't an attack. It wasn't even something physical. A gaze? No, not quite. Aldrich exhaled, his tongue clicking against his teeth as a sharp glint flickered through his eyes. Oh, an artifact. The presence didn't wane. His lips curled. Are you guys trying to see if I left? His voice dropped slightly, a quiet mockery threading into his words. Are you guys on the line? It wasn't Draven himself. The sensation was too subtle for that, which meant one thing. They were watching, from a distance, trying to track his movement, afraid of leaving their stronghold. Aldrich chuckled, low and quiet, his grip tightening over the hilt of his blade. Cowards. They weren't confident. They were desperate. Are we being watched? The figure's voice cut through his thoughts, sharp yet untouched by emotion. Aldrich exhaled slowly, the smirk still ghosting his lips. Seems like it. The figure tapped a gloved finger against his arm. Thoughtful. I heard Draven had an artifact like this. A pause. But it was apparently defective. Aldrich's eyes flickered with amusement. So they've been using a broken toy? The figure turned away, adjusting his cloak as he stepped toward the door. His movements were slow, deliberate, like a man who had already decided his business here was done. A quiet hum, then a slight nod. You are to do as you please. The words were casual, but Aldrich knew what they meant. He had full authority now. As the door clicked shut behind him, silence settled over the chamber. Aldrich remained still for a moment. His smirk faded, his expression unreadable. Then, a slow exhale. It has been a while. His blood had been silent for too long. For years now, he had lived in Varenthia, built his network, secured his power, played the game of politics and control. But before that, before he was a commander, before he was anything at all, he had been a soldier, killer, and on the battlefield, his body had never once been idle. Aldrich's fingers twitched, his breath evening out into something steadier, something sharper. Should I just slaughter a little? His voice was barely a whisper, but the weight behind it, the craving, the hunger, filled the room like a lingering storm cloud. Slowly, his gaze lowered to his right hand. A pitch-black bracelet rested there, dull and unassuming, yet deceptively heavy. His fingers brushed over its surface, a familiar warmth thrumming beneath his touch. Yeah. The decision had already been made. His smirk returned, slower this time, more deliberate. His blood was no longer silent. And if Draven and his men wanted a war, then Aldrich Veltrin would give them one. Without another word, he turned on his heel and stepped toward the door. Each footstep felt lighter than the last, as if he had been waiting for this moment, as if, at long last, he was finally awake again. Aldrich strode through the dimly lit corridors of his stronghold, the heavy oak doors shutting behind him with a dull thud. The flickering sconces along the stone walls cast long, wavering shadows across his path, but his focus was razor-sharp. The night air outside was thick, carrying the distant scent of fire and blood, a battlefield in bloom. The moment he stepped into the courtyard, several guards straightened at attention, their gazes snapping toward him with sharp discipline. Their dark uniforms bore the insignia of his command. His true command, the men who had sworn loyalty not to House Veltrin, but to him alone. They bowed their heads in respect. My lord. One of them spoke first, voice steady but expectant. Are we to move out with you? There was no hesitation in their words, no fear, only readiness. Aldrich's gaze swept over them, assessing. These were seasoned warriors, not the nameless dogs he used to fill the lower ranks, but men who had fought and bled for him. They wanted orders. They wanted action. But this was something else. He exhaled slowly, shaking his head. No, stay here. His voice was quiet but firm, the weight behind his words leaving no room for argument. Hold this place. If anything comes knocking, You know what to do. The guards exchanged brief glances before nodding in unison. Understood. Aldrich didn't linger. He had wasted enough time. His body shifted, muscles tensing in preparation, and then he moved. In an instant, his figure blurred, vanishing from where he had stood. The Qigong technique, a movement art that blurred the line between speed and weightlessness, propelled him forward with inhuman acceleration. The wind roared past his ears as his form became a mere whisper against the cityscape, darting across rooftops, skipping over narrow alleyways, and weaving through the intricate veins of Varenthia like a shadow set free. To the common eye, he was nothing more than a streak of motion, a fleeting specter against the cold glow of the moon. But to him, the battlefield was already alive beneath his senses. His awareness stretched outward, extending past the walls, past the districts, past the flickering lanterns of the city's sleeping masses. He could feel everything: the clash of steel, the sharp crack of splintering wood as barricades were torn down, the brief, agonized gasps of men whose bodies failed them before they even realized they were dying. Draven's men were pressing forward in multiple locations. He could feel them moving, like scattered threads in an intricate web. Their attacks were swift, tactical, meant to cripple his network before he had the chance to react. They thought they had the upper hand. Aldrich smirked as he soared past another rooftop, his landing effortless, his body rolling into the next sprint without losing momentum. He had already reacted. The night stretched wide before him, and the war had only just begun. It was the time to show who really owned Varenthia. The wind howled as Aldrich moved, his body a blur against the night. His Qigong technique carried him swiftly across the rooftops, the city stretching beneath him like a battlefield waiting to be carved into submission. He could feel the threads of conflict weaving through the streets, the clashing of weapons, the shouts of dying men, the raw violence of war erupting in calculated bursts across Varenthia. And yet, something changed. It was subtle at first, a shift in the air, a feeling, like a ripple cutting through still water, an intent. Aldrich's instincts flared, danger. His body reacted before his mind could fully process it, the hairs on his arms standing on edge. In an instant, his spear materialized in his grasp, his muscles coiling as he twisted. Clank! The impact came hard and fast, sending a jolt up his arms. Sparks erupted in the night air as metal clashed against metal, the sheer force of the blow sending him backward. Aldrich's feet barely found purchase as he landed, skidding against the stone with practiced precision. His crimson eyes sharpened. His grip on his spear tightened, his heartbeat steady, controlled. He lifted his gaze, turning his head toward the source of the strike. And there, standing beneath the cold glow of the moon, a young man. He was poised, his stance balanced, a long estoc resting in his grip like an extension of his very being. His eyes, pitch black, empty as the void, stared into Aldrich's own, unreadable. "What do we have here?" Aldrich muttered, his voice low, curious. His mind was already cycling through names, faces, cataloging every fighter, every assassin, every mercenary worth remembering. And yet, this one, he wasn't anyone Aldrich recognized. Not one of Draven's men, not one of Soren's butchers, not one of Viral's cold-blooded tacticians. And that strike just now, that was not something any of them could do. Aldrich's lips pressed into a thin line, his stance shifting just slightly, testing, calculating. "Who are you?" Chapter 583. Who are you? 2. Lucavion's breath steadied. His hands, once trembling from the aftershock of the artifact's vision, now felt still, purposeful. "So this is where you've been hiding." The image of the fortress burned into his mind, a place even Draven hadn't uncovered. The artifact had done more than just reveal the location. It had linked him, however briefly, to his prey. Lucavion had felt it. For just a moment, the faintest pulse of presence. A tether between himself and Aldrich Velterin. And that was all he needed. Now he was here. The city streets were a blur beneath his feet as he moved, the echo of the past pressing against his ribs, urging him forward. His body was taut with tension, coiled like a blade that had been waiting for years to be unsheathed. He had waited for this moment, for this chance, to cut down the ghost of the past. The wind howled as he leapt from rooftop to rooftop, his steps weightless, silent. The streets of Varenthia sprawled beneath him, tangled veins of alleyways and narrow roads. But his focus was singular. Aldrich was on the move. Lucavion could see him now, slipping through the web of conflict with effortless speed. The war had begun, but Aldrich wasn't defending. He wasn't hiding in the fortress that even Draven had failed to uncover. No, he was hunting, and that was fine, because so was Lucavion. He exhaled, feeling the anticipation simmer just beneath his skin. The hunt was over, and the kill was about to begin. Clank! The moment their weapons clashed, Lucavion knew. Aldrich had already sensed him, but he didn't care. Didn't care that the man was skilled. Didn't care that he was older, faster, stronger. Didn't care that this was the same monster who had once left him bleeding in the dirt, unable to fight back. Because this time he was here on his own terms. Aldrich slid backward, his expression unreadable. His grip on his spear remained firm, controlled, but there was something else in his stance now. Interest. Lucavion barely took a breath before he lunged again, his estoc slicing through the night air with terrifying precision. Fast, precise, unrelenting. Aldrich blocked, barely. Sparks flickered between them, the ringing of steel slicing through the city's distant chaos. Lucavion saw the slight shift in Aldrich's expression, the flicker of curiosity in those crimson eyes. He doesn't recognize me. Lucavion's grip tightened around the hilt of his estoc. Aldrich's eyes flickered, assessing, calculating, but not recognizing. Not remembering. Lucavion felt something crack. He doesn't remember? The bastard who had carved a scar across his face. The man who had slaughtered his second family. The only ones who had reached for him when he had nothing. And he didn't even remember? Lucavion's breath came slow, deep, controlled but barely. Aldrich's stance remained steady, his crimson eyes watching him with calm, unreadable curiosity. As if Lucavion was just another nameless opponent. As if their history was meaningless. As if those lives, the ones stolen, the ones he had carved from existence, were nothing. Lucavion's blood boiled. His fingers twitched. His muscles coiled. Every nerve in his body screaming for release. Kill him. The command in his mind was instant, unfiltered. A raw instinct, a fire consuming everything. His vision blurred at the edges. I was the one left behind. I was the one who buried them. I was the one who had to crawl forward, piece myself back together. And you don't remember? Lucavion's voice cut through the air, low and sharp. Aldrich blinked. A flicker of something in his gaze. Mild curiosity. Like a man studying a puzzle whose pieces didn't quite fit. Lucavion exhaled. And then, his bloodlust surged. Like a dam breaking. The air around him grew heavy, thick with suffocating pressure. Aldrich's expression finally shifted. His grip on his spear tightened ever so slightly. Lucavion barely noticed. He was already moving. Swoosh! His estoc struck with terrifying speed. A blur of steel aimed at Aldrich's throat. The attack was not precise, not clean. It was pure killing intent. Aldrich blocked. Clank! The force of Aldrich's spear sent a shuddering impact through Lucavion's arm. The estoc's blade quivered under the pressure, steel grinding against steel as the raw power behind Aldrich's strike forced him to give ground. The wind howled between them, and Lucavion barely had time to react before. Whoosh! Aldrich twisted his spear, using the force of their locked weapons to pivot his body, the air distorting around him as he surged forward. Lucavion's instincts flared. He ducked, the spear's tip whistling past his ear, carving through empty air where his throat had been a heartbeat before. Fast. Too fast. Aldrich didn't stop. His footwork was flawless, his movements seamless. The moment Lucavion dodged, the spear snapped downward like a viper, aimed at his exposed ribs. He barely managed to parry, but the impact rattled his bones, forcing him backward again. Thud! His back hit the stone railing of the rooftop. The wind affinity was clear in every strike, every movement. Aldrich wasn't just strong. He was weightless, swift, untouchable. His spear struck again, and Lucavion had to roll to the side, feeling the force of the attack split the stone behind him. "TCH. You!" Lucavion's voice was taut, sharp as the blade in his grip. But Aldrich, that bastard, he was smiling. No, he was laughing. Those eyes! Aldrich's crimson gaze locked onto Lucavion's with eerie stillness. His expression, for the first time since the fight began, shifted, not with tension, not with calculation, but recognition. Lucavion's breathing hitched, the scar on his face, his black, empty eyes. It was sinking in. Aldrich exhaled slowly, his lips curling. A breath, then, ah ha 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 ha. The sound cut through the night air like a blade. Lucavion's grip on his estoc tightened as Aldrich tilted his head back, his laughter ringing through the empty streets of Varenthia. A genuine laugh, deep, full-bodied. Like this was amusing, like this was funny, like it wasn't the most important moment of Lucavion's life, like it wasn't the culmination of years of suffering, of clawing his way forward, of training until his body broke just to get this chance. Aldrich's laughter slowed, his smirk widening as he finally looked back at Lucavion. His eyes glowed with something unreadable. Excitement? Amusement? Mockery. Who would have thought? Lucavion's blood burned. His muscles tensed, coiled so tight it felt like he might snap. Aldrich took a step forward, his spear resting lightly in his grip. His grin didn't fade, his voice dripping with mirth. "You are that kid from the battlefield." Aldrich's voice carried an almost delighted amusement, his smirk widening as he studied Lucavion like a long-lost curiosity. Lucavion didn't move, didn't blink, didn't breathe. The words scraped against his mind like a rusted blade. That kid, as if he had been nothing, as if the ones who had died, Garrett, Matteo, Felix, Elias, Clara, had been nothing, as if Aldrich had simply stepped over their bodies and forgotten them. Aldrich exhaled through his nose, shifting his spear in his grip. "Ha! I almost feel bad for not remembering." His crimson eyes gleamed, sharp with something wicked. Aldrich chuckled, low and deep, as if he was savoring the moment. His crimson eyes gleamed with something dark, satisfaction, perhaps, or maybe just cruel amusement. Then, his lips parted, and the words that had been burned into Lucavion's memory all those years ago slipped free. "The boy with the scarred eye." Lucavion's breath stilled. Aldrich tilted his head slightly, as if considering, then continued. "What is your name?" Lucavion's grip on his estoc tightened. His gaze was cold, silent, but Aldrich didn't need him to answer, because he already knew. "Lucavion." A slow smirk. "I remember your name." Lucavion's stomach twisted. A flash of heat crawled under his skin, searing through his veins like wildfire. That day on the battlefield, Aldrich had known his name. He had looked him in the eyes. And yet, until now, it hadn't mattered. "You have gotten stronger, really?" Lucavion said nothing. Aldrich's grin widened. "Are you here to take revenge?" The question hung in the air, heavy between them. Lucavion exhaled, slow and measured, his fingers tightening ever so slightly around his weapon. Aldrich chuckled. "If so, come." His eyes glowed, anticipation threading into his voice. "It has been a while since my blood boiled." Then, he lifted his right hand. His fingers brushed against the pitch-black bracelet encircling his wrist. And in the next moment, darkness erupted. The armor consumed him, black plates, seamless and shifting, wrapped over his body in an instant. The air around him thickened, the sheer weight of his presence suffocating. Lucavion's heartbeat remained steady. No hesitation, no fear. The sight of Aldrich standing there, clad in midnight steel, his blood-red eyes glowing beneath his helmet, it didn't shake him. It only confirmed what he already knew. This time, he wasn't the boy who lost. This time, he would kill Aldrich Velterin. Chapter 584. Night of the Wind. Whoosh! The moment Lucavion raised his blade, the air around him shifted. It wasn't just the pressure of his presence. It was something deeper, something celestial. Starlight mana erupted from his body in a luminous cascade, flooding the battlefield with its brilliance. The air warped, space itself bending as his core ignited. Aldrich's crimson eyes gleamed behind his midnight helm, his smirk widening ever so slightly. Knight of the Wind. Lucavion's voice was steady, cold. Aldrich tilted his head, almost amused. "Oh, is that the name you have given to me?" Lucavion didn't answer. He simply moved. Boom! One instant he was standing. The next, he was already there. Aldrich barely had time to register the shift before. Shring! Lucavion's estoc descended, a streak of pure devastation. His body blurred as the celestial force of his core ignited. Void Starfall Blade. Star Surge. A single stroke, swift, absolute. The air trembled under its might. The night sky above them seemed to distort, stars flickering unnaturally as though drawn into the blade itself. Aldrich's instinct screamed. His spear flashed up. Clang! Their weapons met in a catastrophic collision. The rooftop beneath them shattered. The sheer force of impact sent shockwaves rippling outward, buildings groaning as windows exploded into shards. The stone cracked beneath Aldrich's feet. Yet, he didn't break. The wind around him screamed, coiling, twisting. His counterattack came instantly. Stormpiercer. Tempest thrust. His spear blurred, a silver streak cutting through the chaos. The air itself bent, compressed into a singular, piercing force. Lucavion vanished. No, he had already dodged. His foot barely touched the ground before he pivoted, his blade carving a streak of white light through the night. Aldrich's grin widened beneath his helm. This was getting interesting. Swoosh! Wind exploded from his form, a violent storm twisting into existence. The force lifted loose debris into the air, turning shattered stone into lethal projectiles. Lucavion didn't hesitate. Tum! He tore through the storm, his starlight mana devouring the turbulence as he surged forward. His estoc struck again, but Aldrich had already moved. Their weapons clashed in rapid succession. Clang! 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 Each impact sent sparks flying. Each strike shattered the air between them. They weren't just fighting. They were unraveling the battlefield. Lucavion twisted midair, using the momentum of Aldrich's last parry to redirect his blade. A downward stroke. Fast, relentless. Aldrich parried with a flick of his spear, his footwork seamless as he flowed into another attack. Whoosh! Lucavion barely had time to twist his body, the spear grazing past his ribs, slicing clean through his coat. Blood spattered against the cracked stone. But he was already retaliating. He lunged faster, sharper, his estoc striking like a comet falling from the heavens. Aldrich grinned. Stormpiercer. Gale Rend. He twisted. His spear came down in a brutal arc, wreathed in razor-thin wind. Lucavion's eyes narrowed. He met the attack head-on. Crash! The impact sent another shockwave tearing through the cityscape, wind and starlight colliding in a whirlwind of destruction. Lucavion gritted his teeth. Aldrich was powerful. Too powerful. His wind affinity wasn't just an enhancement, it was an extension of his instincts. His movements weren't just fast. They were fluid, adaptive, natural. But Lucavion had spent his entire life fighting against forces greater than himself. And he was not going to lose. Foom! Lucavion's mana surged, void starlight radiating in waves from his core. His estoc burned with celestial brilliance, distorting the very air around him. Aldrich's crimson gaze gleamed behind his dark helm, the wind twisting around his form in a furious storm. You fight well, Aldrich mused, his voice laced with amusement. But his spear blurred. Boom! A single thrust. Not just fast, instantaneous. Lucavion barely reacted in time. Swoosh! He pivoted, the spear's tip slicing through his coat, grazing his ribs. A thin line of red bloomed across his side, pain flaring through his nerves. That one almost ran me through. But he didn't slow. Instead, his grin widened. You talk too much. Lucavion exhaled, releasing all hesitation. His movements shifted. The wildness of his style, the sharp, unpredictable footwork, they refined. Aldrich sensed it immediately. A shift. A transition. The boy who had once fought recklessly was now wielding discipline. And that was far more dangerous. Lucavion lifted his estoc. Mana erupted. Void Starfall Blade. Celestial Spiral. Starlight burst forth, spiraling around him, warping gravity itself. His body became weightless, his next step impossible to track. Then, whoosh, he disappeared. Aldrich's instincts flared. He pivoted. Too late. Lucavion was already above him. His estoc descended. A streak of void-laced light aimed at the exposed joint in Aldrich's armor. Clang! Aldrich barely twisted his spear up in time, deflecting the fatal strike. But Lucavion wasn't done. The moment their weapons met, he flowed into his next technique. Void Starfall Blade, Eclipse Requiem. Boom! The air imploded. Lucavion's blade split into dozens of afterimages, a constellation of lethal strikes raining down at once. Aldrich's expression shifted. He was forced onto the defensive. Clang! 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 Each strike chipped away at him. His wind armor crackled, flickering with instability. Lucavion's eyes gleamed. He saw the opening, and took it. His blade pierced forward. SHNK. Aldrich grunted. The estoc pierced through the gap in his pauldron, slicing deep into his shoulder. A spatter of blood hit the ground. For the first time, Aldrich was injured. Lucavion's smirk sharpened. Looks like you're not untouchable after all. Aldrich exhaled, staring at the wound. Then, he laughed. Low, amused. Not bad. His grip on his spear tightened. Whoosh! A sudden burst of wind exploded outward. Lucavion's instincts screamed, but it was too late. Thwack! Aldrich's knee slammed into his ribs. Pain shot through his body, his breath escaping in a sharp exhale. Swoosh! Before he could recover, Aldrich's spear lashed out. Lucavion barely raised his estoc in time. Clong! The force sent him flying backward. His body crashed against the stone rooftop, skidding until he came to a stop. His breath came ragged, blood dripping from the corner of his mouth. Pain. But Lucavion only grinned. His fingers curled around the hilt of his estoc. Lucavion exhaled slowly, rolling his shoulders. His ribs ached where Aldrich's knee had landed, his muscles screaming from the relentless pace of the battle. Yet none of that mattered, because now, he saw it. The air around Aldrich shifted. No, it wasn't just the air. It was the wind itself. For the first time, the storm surrounding Aldrich wasn't just raw elemental energy. It was controlled, refined. Lucavion's pupils constricted. The swirling mana around Aldrich's body wasn't just an extension of his attacks anymore. It was a part of him. He's finally using it. Aura body. The very technique that marked the difference between 5-star and 6-star. Lucavion had read about it, studied the theory behind it, but he had never fought someone who truly used it. The reason? Because so few people ever reached this stage. 3-star meant a knight could materialize mana, projecting their energy outward. 4-star introduced intent, allowing their will to shape how mana flowed through their techniques. But 6-star? That was different. That was one of the most important and most difficult breakthroughs. Because at 6-star, a knight could achieve something that transcended mere skill. They could forge an aura body, a compressed, refined form of mana, one that merged with their very being. Different from the normal mana that one would use to coat their bodies. It augmented them, reinforced them, made them something more than human. And now, Aldrich stood before him, wrapped in it. Lucavion clenched his jaw, his grip on his estoc tightening. None of his previous opponents had ever used this technique. Not even those who were supposedly stronger than him. Yet Aldrich was using it now. The wind howled as the aura around Aldrich settled into his body, the storm condensing into something sharper. more lethal. Then, Aldrich exhaled, rolling his shoulder. His voice came low, amused. You have made me use it. His crimson eyes gleamed beneath his dark helm. You are not bad. Lucavion breathed in. A slow inhale. A steadying moment. That so? His black eyes gleamed with something wild. Something untamed. Chapter 585. Night of the Wind. 2. Aldrich's smirk deepened, his blood-red eyes gleaming behind the shadows of his helm. You are going to die now. His words weren't spoken with cruelty, nor arrogance, only certainty. Then, whoosh, he vanished, a blur of black wind and killing intent. Lucavion's pupils constricted too fast. The storm surged, a hurricane of force closing in on him from all directions. The weight of Aldrich's presence drowned the battlefield, his spear tearing through the air like a bolt of destruction. Lucavion barely had time to react. The spear was already there, aimed straight for his heart. Death. It should have been instant. But something clicked. The edge of the abyss. Lucavion stood on it, teetering between life and death. And when he was pushed to this limit, his true talent awakened. His instincts sharpened beyond thought, his body reacting before his mind could process the danger. His blade moved. Fwum! The world warped. A ripple of pure void expanded from his estoc, devouring the wind mana surrounding Aldrich's attack. The storm vanished. Aldrich's spear, once a force of absolute destruction, lost its strength. Clang! Lucavion's blade twisted, catching the now weakened spear with effortless grace. The impact, which should have shattered him, was instead redirected. The technique, it had no name. It was something he had glimpsed before. The moment he fought the Kraken. The instant he had grasped Void. Now it manifested in full. Void's starfall blade. Astral consumption. The void around his estoc expanded, twisting into a spiral of pure, devouring force. He twirled his blade, the starlight mana flowing like silk, redirecting Aldrich's strike with elegant ease. Aldrich's balance shifted. For the first time, his footing was compromised. Lucavion's black eyes gleamed. Perfect moment. He moved, his estoc, twisting like a comet, aimed straight for Aldrich's chest. Fatal thrust. Whoosh! But Aldrich wasn't done. His aura body pulsed, and with a sudden burst of wind, he wrenched his spear back, forcing space itself to pull him away. Boom! A counterstrike. Aldrich reversed the momentum. His spear, still spinning from the deflection, twisted in his grip. A masterful recovery. Then, he dove forward. Their weapons collided. Clang! Lucavion barely had time to adjust. Aldrich had recovered too fast. The moment his spear clashed with Lucavion's estoc, he unleashed his true power. A technique wielded only by those who had reached the 6-star realm. High voltage boom. High voltage. The very sky screamed as Aldrich unleashed his full strength. Wind, compressed to the point of destruction, swallowed the battlefield. Lucavion barely had time to react. Aldrich's spear blurred. High voltage stormpiercer. Sky Tyrant's judgment high voltage. A single thrust. But it was unstoppable. Lucavion's instincts flared. Move. Whoosh. He twisted his body, but not fast enough. SHNK. Pain erupted from his side. The spear tore through his coat, piercing deep into his flesh. Blood spilled. Lucavion's body convulsed from the force, his breath catching in his throat. He felt the full weight of 6-star mana pressing into his bones. An overwhelming, crushing force that burned through his veins like a storm. Too strong. His knees wavered. He took one step back. Then, Aldrich appeared before him instantly. His speed was inhuman. Lucavion's body barely had time to recover, barely had time to breathe, before Aldrich's spear was already descending. Lucavion's pupils constricted. This was death. Then, foom! Something ignited in his palm. Black flames. Pitch-black fire surged from his fingertips, swallowing the very air around them. Aldrich's crimson eyes widened. What? The flames did not burn. They devoured. Flame of equinox. Wave of death. The black fire rushed outward in a violent wave, engulfing Aldrich's spear, and then it consumed his mana. Aldrich's entire body jerked backward as the flames devoured his storm energy, stripping the wind away from his technique like peeling layers from his own existence. His instinct screamed, danger. This shouldn't be a threat. Lucavion was weaker. His mana wasn't at the level of a 6-star. And yet, Aldrich felt it, a sensation he had not felt in years. Something beyond logic. Something primordial. The flames did not simply oppose him, they erased his presence. Aldrich's mind raced. What is this? His spear trembled in his grasp. The mana he had infused into it vanished, devoured in an instant. Aldrich's mind raced. This didn't make sense. The first energy, the pitch-black starlight, that was void. He had seen it, fought against it. A rare affinity, but explainable. But these pitch-black flames weren't void. They weren't destruction. They were something else. And for the first time in years, Aldrich felt the cold grip of uncertainty. An artifact? That was the only explanation. No knight, no warrior, no human could wield two conflicting forces within a single core. And yet, Lucavion stood before him, bleeding, breathing, alive. Then, SHNK. Lucavion coughed blood, then vanished. Before Aldrich could even process it, Lucavion was already there. His estoc lunged forward, sharp and unrelenting, aiming straight for Aldrich's exposed ribs. Clank! Aldrich barely caught it in time, twisting his spear to intercept. Sparks flared as steel ground against steel. Then movement. Aldrich's mind recognized it instantly. Lucavion shifted. Not erratically, not wildly, but calculated. His footwork was minimal, barely an inch of movement. Yet perfect. A feint. Lucavion's estoc twitched, pretending to retreat. Aldrich's instincts told him to step forward, and that's when he realized. It was a trap. Lucavion's wrist flicked, his blade whipping back in an unnatural arc, twisting through the narrowest of openings. Clank! Aldrich barely managed to reposition, deflecting by the slimmest of margins. But Lucavion was already moving again. Their fight had become smaller. No grand explosions. No elemental devastation. Just pure, raw combat. And Aldrich was losing. Clank! Lucavion's blade danced along his defenses, always just ahead of him, always forcing him to react instead of act. His smallest mistakes, Lucavion exploited them. A slight imbalance in his grip? Lucavion struck. A half-second delay in his step? Lucavion closed the gap. Aldrich could barely regain control. It was suffocating. Lucavion's blade work was unreal. Like a duel was the only place he existed. Aldrich gritted his teeth. This kid. Lucavion stepped in again. Clank! Aldrich pushed back, his spear twisting, trying to create distance. But Lucavion, he didn't retreat. He collapsed the space again. His estoc curved around Aldrich's block. Aldrich's eyes widened. He had no choice. Thunk! Clean hit. Lucavion's blade scraped along Aldrich's gauntlet, nicking flesh. Not deep, not lethal, but a hit. Aldrich's breath was ragged. His body knew. In a clash of pure technique, Lucavion was stronger. Aldrich exhaled, slow and sharp. His grip tightened around his spear. Annoying. That was the only word for it. This kid. This mere child. A boy he had spared all those years ago on the battlefield. A nameless insect he had let crawl away simply for his own amusement, was out-dueling him. His spear, the very weapon he had mastered through decades of war, was losing in pure technique. To Lucavion, Aldrich's pride seethed. Unacceptable. His crimson eyes darkened. You are getting ahead of yourself. Then, foom! The air imploded. Wind erupted from Aldrich's body, his core surging to its absolute limit. A violent, whirling tempest engulfed him, his entire form consumed by a storm of razor-sharp gales. Lucavion's coat whipped violently, his footing shaking under the sheer force of it. Then, high-voltage Stormpiercer. Tyrant's Howl high voltage. Aldrich moved. Boom! Lucavion's instinct screamed. He barely raised his estoc before. Clang! Aldrich's spear slammed into him, a brutal arc of force. The impact rattled his bones. Chapter 586. Night of the Wind, 3. High Voltage Stormpiercer. Tyrants howl high voltage. Aldrich moved. Boom! Lucavion's instinct screamed. He barely raised his estoc before. Clang! Aldrich's spear slammed into him, a brutal arc of force. The impact rattled his bones. Lucavion gritted his teeth. Too strong. Before he could adjust. Swoosh! Aldrich was already on him again. A second strike. Lucavion parried, but Aldrich's wind-infused spear twisted unnaturally, redirecting the momentum mid-swing. Thwack! The blunt end of the spear smashed into Lucavion's ribs. Pain exploded through his body. His breath hitched, his vision blurred. He stumbled. Aldrich did not let up. He pressed forward, his spear an unstoppable force, his aura roaring like a vengeful storm. This was not technique anymore. This was raw, overwhelming power. Lucavion tried to counter, but he couldn't keep up. Clang! Aldrich's spear rained down like an unrelenting hurricane. Lucavion dodged, blocked, parried. Yet every time he adjusted, Aldrich was faster. Aldrich crushed his defenses, his sheer power widening the gap between them. Then, boom! A final strike. Lucavion tried to move. Too slow. Aldrich's spear slammed straight into his stomach. Crack! Lucavion's body lurched backward, blood spurting from his mouth. He crashed into the rooftop, his vision flickering. His body wouldn't move. Aldrich exhaled. He rolled his shoulder, the storm around him settling as he gazed down at Lucavion. "Stay down," he said, voice smooth, laced with cold satisfaction. "This is the difference between us. Top of form, bottom of form." I gritted my teeth, struggling to keep my vision from blurring into nothingness. My body felt distant, sluggish, every nerve screaming in protest, every muscle refusing to obey. Damn it, I had thought, no, I had believed I could handle this, that my skill, my instincts, my sheer determination would be enough to bridge the gap between me and him, that even if Aldrich was a 6-star warrior, I could outmaneuver him, outthink him, and yet, this is the difference between us. His voice was calm, detached, as if my struggle had been expected, as if my efforts, my blade, my existence had never mattered to begin with. A shadow loomed over me. Slow, deliberate footsteps echoed in the silence, each one carrying the weight of inevitability. My grip tightened around my estoc, fingers trembling from the effort. Move. I willed my body to respond. Stand up. Nothing. I was too weak. Too slow. Too. Lucavion. Vital Yera's voice rang in my mind, cutting through the suffocating fog, threatening to consume me. Sharp. Urgent. My breath hitched, and suddenly, I was there again. The battlefield. 15 years old. A spear in my hands. The weight of armor that still felt foreign on my shoulders. The deafening blare of the war horn. Garrett. Mateo. Felix. Elias. Clara. I saw them all. I saw them die. Swoosh! Garrett's chest was pierced clean through before he even had time to react. Mateo's throat was slit open in a blur of green light. Felix. Elias. Clara. One by one they were torn from existence. Their deaths weren't grand, weren't dramatic. They were efficient, merciless. I had stood there, frozen, my body refusing to move, my mind screaming at me to do something. Clara had been the last. Her hands had glowed with mana, her stance unsteady but determined. "Stay back!" she had shouted, her voice shaking but fierce. I remembered the knight tilting his head, that condescending smirk, the effortless way his spear had torn through her magic. And then, stab! I saw her fall again, the way her fingers twitched, as if reaching for something, someone. Her breath shallow, her lips parting in silent disbelief, her eyes dim but searching. For me, for the person who should have saved her. I had done nothing. And Aldrich's words now, they weren't new. I had heard them before. "You're still alive. Interesting. The past, the present, they blurred together, tangled in the haze of my breaking consciousness. The night from back then, the night standing before me now. It didn't matter which battlefield this was. The outcome was always the same. I lost. I failed. I was weak. But was that really the end of it? My breaths were shallow, my fingers numb. But somewhere deep, in the pit of my soul, something burned. A spark. No. My vision blurred, the edges of the world folding in on themselves. The weight of my body was distant, yet the cold bite of reality pressed against my skin like an iron brand. Aldrich's figure was a dark blur. His approach slow, deliberate, certain. His aura flared around him, a violent storm of condensed mana, twisting and crackling with raw, unrestrained power. His aura body. A technique that forged the physical form into something beyond human, beyond mortal. A body sculpted by mana, refined through mastery, creating something faster, stronger, superior. A technique that separated the weak from the strong. A technique that separated him from me. Yet, was that truly the case? For a split second, everything around me changed. The battlefield, the wounds, the crushing weight of my own mortality. It all faded. Instead, I stood within a memory. Brat. Master's voice was as sharp as the blade he had once put in my hands. I remembered the way his golden eyes flickered as he regarded me. Arms crossed. His presence as heavy as a mountain. You're training for the sake of beating someone, aren't you? I had said nothing. I didn't need to. He scoffed, shaking his head before rising to his feet. His expression stern and unyielding. With the way you are now, you won't be able to defeat him. A truth that cut deeper than any blade. I had spent years honing my sword for one reason. One singular purpose. Revenge. To kill Aldrich. To cut off his head with my own hands. But was that all? The memory shattered, and I was back in my broken body, my knees half bent, my breathing unsteady. Aldrich was almost upon me now. His spear glinted under the dim light, his expression unreadable beneath his helm. I wasn't afraid. No, I was awake. What was it I truly lived for? Not just revenge. Not just survival. The impossible. To stand at the precipice of death. To dance along the line between life and oblivion, and cross it. To step into the realm where no one believed I could tread. To achieve the impossible. The answer had always been there. And now, at the very edge of death, I reached for it. My gaze locked onto Aldrich. But I wasn't watching him. I was watching his aura body. The way it shifted. The way it formed around his frame, layering over his muscles, strengthening every fiber of his being. Imitate it. And then, I reached inward, deep into the core of my being, past the wounds, past the exhaustion, past the remnants of a body that had nearly given up. And I commanded it to move, a flicker of light, cold, vast, eternal. My first core ignited, devourer of stars. A shroud of deep starlight flickered to life around me. Thin at first, then growing, spreading, weaving itself into something more. The void-like energy of my mana didn't crash outward like Aldrich's storm. It was silent, subtle, not a raging hurricane, but an all-consuming abyss. A thin, barely perceptible layer of starlight formed over my skin. Unlike Aldrich's aura body, which reinforced his physical form through sheer force, mine did something different. It devoured. Not enough. The thought slammed through me like a vice, my breathing sharp and uneven. The thin veil of starlight around my body flickered, unstable, struggling to hold. It wasn't enough, because it couldn't be enough. This was why aura body belonged only to those who had reached the 6-star rank. Because their mana was stable. Because their cores had matured, refined themselves enough to handle the strain. I was forcing something into existence that wasn't meant to be. I could feel it, like trying to build a bridge out of smoke, like forcing reality to bend in a way it didn't want to. The structure was there, but the foundation, the power, was insufficient. And yet, I had something else. The second core inside me, the one that had never truly settled, never truly harmonized. Flame of equinox. Life and death. Opposites, contradictions, forces that weren't meant to exist in tandem. Yet within me they did. A raw, untamed power that burned at my very soul. Aldrich's spear was nearly upon me. No time. No hesitation. Draw it. I reached inward again. And I tore the power from the flame of equinox. The reaction was instant. White-hot agony detonated through my veins. A sensation beyond pain. Like my very cells were splitting apart. Like my body was being crushed, melted, remade all at once. The life energy burned, searing through my mana circuits like wildfire, forcing my body to endure. The death energy devoured, stabilizing, consuming the excess, anchoring the chaotic force before it could destroy me. I felt it all, every nerve screaming, every bone trembling, as if rejecting what I was forcing it to accept. The two opposing forces did not belong together. And yet, I made them belong. The shroud of starlight around me darkened, its edges flickering with the eerie, molten glow of the flame of equinox. Life and death melded into form. Not a true aura body. Not a technique refined through years of mastery. This was something else. Something raw. Something unnatural. The devourer of stars. Wrapped around my body, no longer just an extension of my mana, but an extension of my very existence. Aldrich's spear struck, yet now I could see it slowed. Chapter 587. Night of the Wind. 4. Time stretched. The spear, once too fast for my eyes to track, now moved as if trapped in thickened air. Every rotation of its shaft, every flicker of wind mana dancing along its surface. I saw all of it. The agony inside me was unbearable. My nerves burned. My bones felt wrong. My mana circuits screamed in protest. Every cell in my body was caught in the war between life and death, between destruction and survival. Yet, I moved. My body, weighed down just moments ago, now felt weightless. The air itself seemed to bend around me, every detail crisp, every motion clear. Dodge. A fraction of a second before impact, I shifted. Not wildly, not with desperation. A single, precise step to the side. The spearhead tore through empty space, grazing past my ribs. I could feel the force of it, the sheer weight of the technique behind the strike. Had I moved even a breath too late, my chest would have been torn open. But it missed, and in that moment Aldrich was open. Now, I lunged. My estoc, gripped in both hands, twisted in a perfect, needle-like thrust. No excess movement. No wasted effort. My muscles flowed like a taut wire, releasing all its tension in an instant. SHNK. My blade pierced Aldrich's shoulder. His body jerked, the force of the impact sending a rippling shockwave through his aura body. For the first time, his balance wavered. For the first time, I broke through. His head snapped toward me, his crimson eyes widening. Too late. I had already moved again. I twisted the blade, angled just right, forcing the wound open, severing deeper into flesh. Aldrich's body reacted instinctively, his stance shifting to counter. But I was already gone. My speed was unreal. I wasn't running, I was tearing through space itself. Each step carried me further than it should have, as if the very concept of movement had changed. I felt it. The wind, the force, the momentum. My body wasn't just keeping up. It was leading the rhythm of the fight. Aldrich staggered back, his free hand snapping up to grip his wounded shoulder. Blood, rich, dark, spilled down his armor, staining the gleaming metal. He exhaled sharply, his expression unreadable. You! His words faltered. I pressed forward. Aldrich's wound was still fresh, his aura body flickering from the force of my strike. His stance, unyielding, controlled, was the only thing keeping him from collapsing. I won't let him recover. I surged in, my estoc already snapping toward his ribs. A direct stab, no hesitation. No mercy. Clang! Aldrich barely managed to twist his spear, deflecting the strike with the shaft. But he wasn't steady. His movements weren't as fluid as before. Another strike. I reversed the grip, pivoted, and slashed. The edge of my blade screamed through the air. Clang! He blocked again, but this time I saw it. The way his left foot slipped back an inch too far. The tightening in his jaw. The way his breathing staggered. He was feeling it. Again. I twisted my body, mana surging through my limbs as I aimed another thrust for his thigh. Thump! I froze. A sharp, violent pulse shot through my chest, spreading like wildfire through my veins. Thump! I staggered. My vision swam. And then, a rush of warmth clawed up my throat. Blood erupted from my mouth, splattering against the cold stone beneath me. My knees buckled, my body folding forward as another pulse tore through my core. Thump! What? Lucavion! Vitalyara's voice slammed into my mind. Urgent. Desperate. Stop! You're destroying your core. I clenched my teeth, gripping the hilt of my estoc so tightly my knuckles ached. My body, still flooded with the chaotic fusion of my two cores, was breaking apart. I felt it, my mana circuits seizing, the conflicting energies raging inside me like a beast trying to tear its way free. Stop this right now. I could hear the fear in her voice, but I couldn't. Not when I looked up and saw Aldrich. He was still standing, but his posture shaken, his shoulder still bleeding, his breath just as ragged as mine. I heard him. I finally heard him, and it wasn't enough. Not nearly enough. Then, I saw them. Garrett, Mateo, Felix, Elias, Clara, their bodies lying motionless in the dirt, their wounds gaping, blood soaking into the ground. As if time had folded in on itself, I saw them again, the moment they had fallen, the moment I had failed. My breathing came in short, shaking bursts. My fingers trembled. No, not again. Not when I was this close. I clenched my jaw, my body screaming in protest, my core cracking under the pressure, and I forced myself to stand. I stood. Pain flared through every inch of my body, raw and unrelenting, but it no longer mattered. My breath came in sharp, ragged bursts, my vision pulsing with the aftershocks of forcing my cores to meld. Every heartbeat sent another wave of agony through my chest, but my fingers tightened around my estoc. Aldrich was still there, still breathing, still standing. Not enough. I forced my body forward, forced my mana to respond. Void Starfall Blade. Dance of the Celestial Dot. The moment the words formed in my mind, everything around me shifted. The Void Starfall Blade wasn't just about destruction. It wasn't just about power. It was about flow. And I could see it now. The steps, the rhythm, the intricate weave of movement and blade, void and motion. I envisioned it, and then I moved. The first movement, Stellar Prelude. I dashed forward. No, I tore through space itself. The ground beneath me cracked as I launched off my back foot, my estoc carving a clean arc through the air. The void element laced along my blade erased resistance, making each motion effortless. Aldrich reacted instantly, twisting his spear to intercept. High voltage clang. High voltage. His aura flared, wind mana bursting outward as he blocked, his footing sliding back just slightly. I wasn't done. The second movement, Nebulous Spiral. My footwork twisted, my estoc whipping around in an unpredictable arc. The void around my blade expanded, warping space itself, making my trajectory impossible to track. Aldrich's eyes narrowed. His spear snapped up, adjusting. Too late. The blade cut across his side, carving through the mana reinforcement of his aura body. Blood sprayed, his coat splitting open. I could hear his breath hitch, but I was already onto the next strike. The third movement, Falling Astral Spear. A single thrust, pinpoint, precise. Everything funneled into a singular, fatal strike aimed for his heart. The void compressed, condensing into pure destruction. Aldrich felt the danger. High voltage whoosh. High voltage. He vanished, his body flickering back with a sudden burst of wind mana. My estoc missed his chest by mere inches, slicing into his shoulder instead. I saw it, his breath uneven, the stiffness in his movements. He was weakening. I had him. The fourth movement, ecliptic waltz, a blur of motion. I pivoted, my body twisting in perfect synchrony with my blade. The S-dock traced a circle of starlit void before. Crash! I slammed it downward. High voltage clash. High voltage. Aldrich blocked, but this time he didn't fully deflect. His footing buckled. His spear shook under the impact. His aura body, once unbreakable, was cracking. I inhaled sharply. The final movement. Eventide descent. The finishing strike. I exhaled, my S-dock rising high. Void starlight flooded around my blade. The energy coalescing into something vast. Something absolute. For a fleeting second, it was as if the night sky itself had descended into my hands. And then, I moved. A single downward slash. All of my speed. All of my power. Everything. My blade descended. Aldrich raised his spear in a final act of defiance. But it was too late. My S-dock, wreathed in the consuming void, cleaved straight through his aura body, through his arm, through bone. SHLNK. The resistance was nothing, like a hot knife through butter. Aldrich's right arm, the one gripping his spear, separated cleanly at the shoulder. Blood erupted from the wound, spraying across the battlefield. Iya! His scream tore through the night, raw and broken. But I wasn't finished. I pivoted, reversing my grip. Slash! My blade severed his other arm at the elbow. Aldrich collapsed to his knees, his body trembling violently, his breath coming in short, erratic gasps. His once proud stance, the towering presence of the Knight of the Wind, reduced to this. His head tilted upward, his crimson eyes locking onto mine. I stared down at him, and then, I saw them. Garrett, Matteo, Felix, Elias, Clara. They stood beside him, not in blood, not in horror, but smiling. Their faces were as I remembered them before the massacre. You did it. The words drifted softly through the air. We knew you would be able to do it. I swallowed, my chest tightening in a way that had nothing to do with my wounds. My grip on my S-dock wavered. Garrett nodded, his easy grin never fading. Matteo laughed, rubbing the back of his head. Took you long enough. Felix smirked. Ha! So he wasn't untouchable after all. Elias adjusted his glasses, a look of quiet pride on his face. And Clara? Clara just watched me, her eyes warm, full of something I couldn't name. She stepped forward slightly. Now it's time to let us go, Lucavion. My breath hitched. A single tear slipped from my eye. Yeah. I am sorry it took this long. I raised my blade. Aldrich's lips parted, but no words came. Goodbye? My ghosts of the past. Slash. His head rolled onto the blood-soaked ground. Silence. The wind carried the last remnants of his life away, dispersing like dust beneath the stars. And when I looked back, Garrett, Matteo, Felix, Elias, and Clara, they were gone. Chapter 588, Tuop needs to get nerfed. Lucavion stood before Aldrich's ruined body, his breath ragged, his vision pulsing with the agony threatening to consume him. The headless corpse lay sprawled before him, its severed limbs painting the ground in crimson. The night air was thick with the scent of blood, heavy with the finality of what had just transpired. Then the pain struck. Irk! His body convulsed, a violent tremor racking his frame as another surge of blood erupted from his lips. His knees buckled, and for the first time in his life, he truly felt it. Pain beyond the battlefield, beyond wounds that would heal with time. This was different, deep, crippling, unforgiving, like his very existence was fracturing from within. His fingers dug into the stone beneath him, knuckles turning white as he struggled to keep himself upright. But the weight, the sheer crushing weight of what he had done, what he had pushed himself beyond, threatened to drag him into oblivion. Then, a voice. Lucavion. It wasn't spoken aloud, yet it resounded through him, clear as a bell. He lifted his head barely, his breath shallow, his body trembling as a figure emerged before him. Vitaliera. She stood there, her presence stark against the moonlit ruins, her golden fur glowing faintly with an ethereal light. but there was no warmth in her expression. Only raw, unfiltered anger. Why? Why did you do it? Her voice lashed out, sharp and trembling. Her ears flattened against her head. Her usual composed tone was gone, replaced by something frantic, something desperate. Lucavion exhaled, forcing a weak smirk despite the blood on his lips. Needed to be done. Why? Your core. Her eyes, so full of light, of something ancient and boundless, pierced through him, searching for something, anything in his gaze that could justify what he had done to himself. Lucavion didn't answer. Couldn't. Stupid bastard. Her voice cracked, and before he could react, she moved. She didn't hesitate. Vitaliera surged forward, pressing a small, trembling paw against his abdomen. A rush of energy exploded from her palm, a blinding white radiance surging outward, engulfing them both in a glow so pure it almost burned. Lucavion's body jerked as the energy forced itself into him, spreading like wildfire through his shattered mana circuits, grasping at the frayed edges of his being, trying, desperately, to hold him together. Stay like this. Don't move. Her command was absolute. Lucavion, for once, had no choice but to obey. The warmth pressed into his abdomen, sinking past skin and flesh, winding through his veins like a tide of fire and light. It burned, not with pain, but with something deeper, something fundamental. A force that sought to mend what should have been beyond mending. Lucavion breathed in slowly. The air still smelled of blood. His blood. It was pooling beneath him, staining the ground where he knelt, a dark reminder of what he had done, what he had forced himself to become, if only for a moment. Vitaliara's pole remained firm against him, her golden glow pulsing in time with his ragged breaths. Idiot. Her voice trembled, thick with something she refused to name. Lucavion didn't answer. He simply watched her, silent as the warmth spread, settling into the deepest fractures of his being. His core was beyond overdrawn. He had felt it the moment the fight ended, the second the rush had faded and the weight of reality had slammed back into him. It wasn't just pain. It was wrongness, a sensation of something in him unraveling, the delicate balance between life and death thrown into chaos. Because he had done something he wasn't supposed to. His body wasn't ready. His core wasn't ready. And now he was paying the price. Vitaliera let out a sharp breath, her paw pressing harder against him. What were you going to do if I wasn't here? Still, Lucavion remained silent. What if? She swallowed, her ears twitching, her voice tight. What if this was it? What if your core collapsed entirely? What then? He didn't answer, because she already knew. His core wasn't stable. It never had been. It was an anomaly, a force that had no right existing in a single body. Devourer of stars. Flame of equinox. Two opposing forces that had barely coexisted until now, bound together only by sheer will and reckless instinct. Tonight, he had forced them into something new, and nearly broken himself in the process. The glow from her paw flared brighter, her life energy pouring into him without restraint. Each pulse of her power steadied his breathing, smoothed the erratic pulse of his heart, dulled the jagged ache laced through his mana circuits. And yet, it wasn't enough. Vitaliera knew it too. If it were me before Stormhaven, her voice wavered, I wouldn't have been able to do this. I wouldn't have been able to heal you at all. Her paw trembled against his skin. Do you understand? Do you even realize how close you were? Lucavion's fingers curled against the stone. He exhaled, slow and measured. He knew. Of course, he knew. He had gambled everything on that moment, on his instinct telling him he could reach it. The power Aldrich wielded, the aura body, that separated a 6-star from the rest of the world. Lucavion had glimpsed it and forced his own path to it. Through sheer defiance. Through will alone. And his body had suffered for it. Vitaliera didn't speak for a long moment. Her ears were still pressed flat against her skull, her tail stiff, every part of her bristling with frustration. And something else. Something raw. Lucavion knew why she was like this. Why she was pushing too much life energy into him. Why she was lashing out while forcing him to heal. She was scared. She didn't understand why he had done it. And she hated that. But more than that, she hated that she couldn't stop him from doing it again. Lucavion closed his eyes for a moment, letting the warmth settle, letting the scolding words pass over him without resistance. She needed to yell at him, so he let her. He stayed silent, because he knew if he said anything at all, he would only make her angrier. Vital Yara's glow pulsed, her energy surging into him, smoothing over the broken edges of his existence. Yet, as the light coursed through his veins, something in her aura shifted. A pause, a hesitation, and then, cracked. The word came out soft, distant. Lucavion opened his eyes, his breath slow, controlled, even as a dull weight settled in his chest. For an awakened, one's core cracking meant death. Not just injury, not just a wound to be mended with time. Death. Because to crack one's core was to sever the link to mana itself. To lose the very essence that made an awakened what they were. His fingers twitched, but he remained silent, waiting for her next words. Vital Yara's expression was unreadable. Her golden eyes locked onto his core, as if seeing something beyond flesh. And then, but it is not that severe. Lucavion's chest rose and fell, slow and steady. It can be healed. Relief did not come. Not yet. He only inhaled, letting her words settle, feeling the warmth of her energy as it wound deeper, stabilizing what little remained intact. Then, Vital Yara's gaze flickered toward Aldrich's remains. His torso still stood, blood pooling around him, his aura long since extinguished. Yet the death mana within him lingered, a dense, potent force, clinging to the last fragments of his existence. Vitaliera exhaled. Absorb his death mana now. Lucavion followed her gaze, his vision narrowing on the ruined corpse, the remnants of a 6-star warrior. Okay. His voice was quiet, but resolute. He closed his eyes and reached. Shrrrrrk. The air around him twisted. A pull, a shift, a rupture in the natural flow of mana. The moment he called upon it, his flame of equinox stirred, burning in the depths of his being, seizing upon the remnants of Aldrich's power. And it was overwhelming. Not just raw death mana, not just the remnants of a warrior. It was something else, denser, heavier, almost suffocating, like the weight of all the battles Aldrich had fought, all the lives he had taken, all the victories he had carved into existence. Lucavion's breath hitched, his body stiffened, his mana circuits straining as the sheer density of the energy flooded into him. A mid-4-star warrior. That was where he had been. Stuck, blocked. But now, his core roared to life, the flame of equinox, devouring Aldrich's death mana, not as mere sustenance, but as fuel. His rank surged. Mid-4-star, no peak. The barrier he had fought against, the wall that had loomed before him, shattered beneath the sheer weight of the power flowing into him. Yet, even as his core absorbed it, another force stirred. Vitaliera. Her energy wrapped around him, seizing upon the excess, channeling it not into him, but into his shattered devourer of stars core. Chapter 589. Tuop needs to get nerfed, too. Vitaliera pressed her paw against his chest, her golden energy seeping deeper, weaving through the fractured remains of his core. The light pulsed, steady, unwavering, as it worked its way through the cracks, forcing them to mend, binding together what should have been beyond repair. Lucavion could feel it, not just the healing but her focus, the sheer force of her will as she poured every ounce of herself into fixing him. And yet, reckless, idiotic, suicidal bastard. Her voice was sharp, each word laced with something that was neither anger nor frustration, but something deeper, something raw. Do you have any idea how close you were? Do you understand how fragile this is? Lucavion exhaled slowly. He didn't answer, not because he didn't know but because he did. Because the more she spoke, the more her words trembled at the edges, the more she pushed her energy into him with too much force, as if trying to make up for the fact that she hadn't been able to stop him from doing this in the first place. If I wasn't here, she growled, her tail flicking in agitation. You'd be dead. Dead? Lucavion. Another surge of light. A sharp pulse of warmth burrowed into his core, forcing the shattered fragments to align, to stabilize. The pain dulled. The wrongness receded. What were you thinking? Oh, wait, you weren't thinking. No, of course not. You just threw yourself into something you weren't ready for. Again, because gods forbid you ever consider your limits like a normal person. Lucavion let out a slow breath, eyes flickering open just slightly. She was close. Too close. Her ears flattened, her fur bristling, her tail lashing like she wanted to smack him across the face with it. But her paws, one on his chest, the other hovering just above his abdomen, did not waver. He could see it. The way her glow flickered at the edges. The way her body trembled from the sheer exertion. She was using everything. Every ounce of life energy she had to stabilize his core, to pull him back from the precipice. And she wasn't stopping. Stupid. Infuriating. Suicidal. A harsh exhale. Her claws pressed ever so slightly into his skin. Do you think I enjoy this? Do you think I want to fix the mess you make of yourself every damn time? Lucavion said nothing, because she didn't mean it. Not really. The moment she saw him crumbling, she had acted without hesitation. The moment she realized his core was cracked, she had moved before even thinking. Because the truth was, she would always fix him, because she couldn't bear the alternative. You should be grateful I even bother with you, you reckless idiot. Her voice shook, just slightly. Lucavion closed his eyes again. A flicker of a smirk ghosted his lips. Not in amusement, not in arrogance, just because he knew, and because she needed to say it. So he let her, and stayed silent. The last of Vitalyara's energy settled into place, a final pulse of warmth threading through his body before fading. The pain, the unbearable wrongness that had plagued his core, dulled into something distant, something bearable. His body no longer felt like it was on the verge of collapse. Lucavion inhaled slowly. It was over, or so he thought. Then, something felt off. His breath hitched, his body tensing. Instinctively, he reached inward, searching for the familiar presence of his devourer of stars core. The deep, endless abyss of starlight mana that had always been there, humming beneath his skin, silent but constant. But now, nothing. A vast, empty void. It was gone. His eyes snapped open, sharp and alert, locking onto Vitalyara. Vitalyara? His voice was steady, but there was something beneath it. A quiet urgency. She didn't hesitate, didn't falter. I sealed your core. Lucavion's breath stalled. What? Vitalyara exhaled, her golden eyes firm, unwavering. Are you deaf? I said I sealed your core. Lucavion stared at her, waiting for an explanation, waiting for something that made sense. I couldn't allow any mana to enter your core, no matter what. Her voice was sharp, but beneath it, something softer lurked. Right now, your core is in such a fragile state that any disturbance, any at all, could cause the crack to widen. His fingers twitched. His core, his connection to it, was severed. He couldn't even feel it. Then, what did you actually fix? Vitalyara's tail flicked. I saved your meridians. I stabilized your connection to the core. But I didn't remove the crack completely. A pause. I can't. Lucavion's eyes narrowed. Not as I am now. Her words hung between them, unspoken weight pressing down. He exhaled slowly. Then, yes, it will take a while. And until then, you won't be able to use your core. Silence. Lucavion processed the words carefully, methodically. It wasn't that she didn't want him to use it. Normally, she wouldn't have sealed it at all. But he was different. You are one of the most talented people I have ever seen, she muttered, staring at him with something unreadable in her eyes. Maybe the most talented. Lucavion raised an eyebrow slightly, but she wasn't done. Even when you're not cultivating, I've seen it. You unconsciously draw mana into your core, without even thinking. That much was true. His connection to mana was instinctual, effortless. He barely needed to try. But now, that talent, the thing that had always given him an edge, was a danger. And I will not take that risk. Her voice was final, absolute. Lucavion's gaze remained steady on her, unreadable, his mind turning over the weight of her words. He had spent years refining his control over mana, sharpening his instincts until drawing it into his core was as natural as breathing. And now he was being told not to breathe. Then, how long will it take? Vitaliera hesitated for only a moment before replying. I don't know. Lucavion's eyes narrowed slightly. From the way I am now, it shouldn't take more than a year. A year. More than a year. That was a long time. Lucavion didn't flinch, didn't react outwardly, but his mind ran the calculations. A year without his devourer of stars. Without the core that had carried him through battle after battle, the core that had defined his growth. That was a severe handicap. But, Vitaliera continued, you can still use your flame of equinox. Lucavion's eyes flicked downward, to the corpse before him. Aldrich lay in pieces, the once formidable warrior reduced to a mere bloodied ruin at his feet. The battle was over, yet the price remained. Sigh! He exhaled, his shoulders loosening ever so slightly as reality settled in. Reckless. That was the word, wasn't it? What he did was reckless, charging past his limits, forcing his body into something it wasn't ready for, pushing beyond what should have been possible. And now he was paying for it. His lips twitched, amusement flickering in his expression despite everything. Well, he murmured, his gaze lingering on Aldrich's remains. I was planning on using my master's name, but I guess we'll postpone that a bit later. Vitaliara's ears twitched. Humph. You should be grateful you're still alive to postpone anything. Lucavion chuckled under his breath, shaking his head. His core was sealed, his mana crippled, and yet, as his smirk returned, there was no regret in his voice. Still not bad. Lucavion exhaled, his breath still uneven but steadying. His body ached, more than it ever had, but it was no longer screaming in protest. Slowly, deliberately, he pushed himself up, his muscles straining as he forced himself to stand. Vitaliera watched him, her golden eyes sharp, but she said nothing. When he was finally upright, he let out a slow breath and turned to her. His expression was unreadable for a moment, his gaze lingering on her before he spoke. Thank you. His voice was quiet, sincere, not the usual teasing lilt, not the smooth arrogance he wore like armor. A genuine thanks. Vitaliara's ears twitched. Her tail flicked once. Then, she turned her head slightly, as if avoiding his gaze. Humph. Don't get sentimental. Lucavion's lips curled slightly. Wouldn't dream of it. With that, he turned his attention to Aldrich's corpse. His eyes scanned the body carefully before settling on the gleam of a bracelet wrapped around the man's arm. His gaze flickered lower, landing on the spatial ring that still sat on Aldrich's finger. And then his spear. Lucavion smirked. I will be taking these. He stepped forward, crouching slightly as he slipped the bracelet from Aldrich's lifeless wrist. It was well crafted, intricate in its design, something far too valuable to leave behind. He inspected it briefly before securing it in his own storage. Next was the spear. Even in death, the weapon retained an imposing presence, its shaft imbued with the faint traces of wind mana, the edge sharp and unyielding. Lucavion ran a hand over it, feeling the weight, the balance. Not bad. With a flick of his wrist, he stored it away, then reached for the spatial ring. He rolled it between his fingers, smirking to himself. Spatial storages couldn't be placed inside one another. That meant he'd have to go through this one later. No rush. Finally, his gaze drifted beyond the battlefield, toward the horizon where the first traces of dawn began bleeding into the sky. The night had felt endless. Yet here was the sun, as if nothing had happened. Lucavion let out a quiet chuckle, then turned his head slightly toward Vitaliera. You have a lot of questions, don't you? She didn't hesitate. Yes. Lucavion let the word linger in the air for a moment before exhaling through his nose. Then, without another word, he reached down and grabbed Aldrich's severed head. Chapter 590 Trinity. The war in Varenthia had begun. The city burned with chaos. The streets, once filled with murmured deals and quiet exchanges, now rang with the clash of steel, the screams of the dying, and the crackling of fire spreading through warehouses and dens of the Black Veil. Draven moved through the battlefield like a specter of war. His blade flashed, his movements sharp and calculated. There was no wasted effort. Strike, kill, move. Viral fought with precision, every motion deliberate, his blade an extension of his mind. He had no love for unnecessary violence, but his strikes were surgical, cutting through the enemy with terrifying efficiency. Soren, in contrast, was destruction incarnate, a war beast in human form. Every swing of his warhammer sent bodies flying, shattered bones, and turned the battlefield into a slaughterhouse. Where Viral was a scalpel, Soren was an avalanche. And together, they tore through the remnants of the Black Veil's forces. Draven had expected this, a crushing, decisive attack to cripple their control. What he hadn't expected was the backup that arrived next. From the alleyways, from the rooftops, from the broken buildings where the battle had already raged, 3 figures emerged. They weren't ordinary fighters. Draven knew strength when he saw it. And these 3, they weren't just strong. They were trained. His grip on his blade tightened as he got his first real look at them. One was a tall, broad-shouldered man with a great axe strapped to his back. His crimson armor marked with deep scars, proof of countless battles. His eyes were calm, but heavy with experience. The second was lean, dressed in dark clothing with twin daggers glinting at his hips. His stance was low, predatory, like a beast waiting to strike. His silver eyes flickered with amusement, as if this entire war was nothing more than a game. The third was the most dangerous. A spear rested easily in his hand, his grip relaxed. His dark hair was tied back, his expression unreadable, but Draven knew immediately. This was no ordinary warrior. The air around him felt heavier, not from mana pressure, not from an aura, but from something else. Something old. Draven's instincts screamed at him. "Shit!" he muttered under his breath. "Who the hell are these bastards?" Soren cracked his neck, his grin widening. Finally, was getting bored. Viral, however, narrowed his eyes. His grip on his sword shifted slightly, a small, almost imperceptible change. But Draven caught it. He was wary, which meant these men were dangerous. The one with the spear stepped forward, his gaze scanning the battlefield with detached interest before landing on Draven. "You must be the one leading this," he mused, his voice light, almost conversational. Draven's smirk was sharp. "Took you long enough to show up. Thought your boss was just gonna roll over and let us take the city." The man tilted his head slightly. "Aldrich isn't moving yet." Draven expected as much. Aldrich was smart. He'd wait, watch, assess. But these 3, these weren't just lieutenants. The air tensed, the battlefield falling into an eerie silence as the 3 unknown warriors stood across from Draven, Viral, and Soren. There was no hesitation, no pre-battle theatrics, no unnecessary words. They weren't here to intimidate. They were here to kill. Soren let out a sharp exhale, his fingers tightening around the handle of his warhammer. TCH. Finally, some decent prey. Viral, in contrast, was silent. His sharp gaze locked onto the man with the spear. His grip on his sword adjusted subtly. No wasted movements, just preparation. Draven's smirk remained, but his body had already shifted into a defensive stance. His instincts screamed at him. These 3 weren't just strong, they were coordinated. There was no reckless bravado, no wasted confidence. They were killers. And then, they moved. The broad-shouldered axeman surged forward first, his crimson armor catching the flickering flames around them. He wasn't fast, but he didn't need to be. Every step carried the weight of sheer, overwhelming force. He swung his great axe in a horizontal arc, the air around it howling from the sheer power behind the strike. Soren roared in response, meeting brute force with brute force. His warhammer clashed against the axe, sending a deafening shockwave through the street. The ground beneath them cracked, cobblestones shattering under the raw impact. Soren grinned. Not bad. But the axeman didn't react. No change in expression. No sign of amusement. Just cold, efficient violence. He pushed forward, his strength pressing against Soren's stance, forcing the larger man back by inches. Viral, meanwhile, barely had time to dodge as the dagger-wielding assassin vanished. A blur of movement, faster than any normal fighter should have been. He reappeared at Viral's flank, one dagger slicing through the air with deadly precision. Viral twisted at the last second, his sword barely catching the attack, steel scraping against steel. The force behind the blow sent a jarring shock through his arm. Fast. Too fast. The assassin's silver eyes gleamed. You react well, he murmured. Let's see how long that lasts. Viral didn't respond. He didn't need to. Steel clashed, blades flashing in the firelight as the two entered a deadly dance of speed and precision. Draven, however, had no time to watch them, because the man with the spear was already upon him. Draven barely managed to sidestep as the spear whistled past his face, the air screaming from the sheer speed of the thrust. Too fast. Draven retaliated immediately, slashing toward the spear wielder's exposed side. But the man moved with unnatural ease, shifting just enough to avoid the strike, his spear already repositioning for another attack. Draven exhaled sharply. This wasn't good. They were all 5-star awakened. But the gap between them was clear. This wasn't a battle of brute strength. It was a battle of skill, of experience, of killing intent. And these three, they weren't losing. Soren gritted his teeth as he struggled against the sheer power of the axeman, his warhammer barely keeping up with the relentless strikes. Viral was already adjusting his movements, his swordwork adapting to the assassin's impossible speed. But even then, he was only keeping up, not winning. Draven clicked his tongue, dodging another spear thrust that nearly took his throat. He had fought hundreds of warriors. Draven smirked, blood trailing down his arm from a narrow cut that had barely missed tearing into muscle. His stance shifted, his grip on his blade tightening as the spear wielder circled him, his expression calm, unreadable. You bastards from the Empire? Draven exhaled, voice edged with sharp amusement. Do you think the streets are a joke? The spear wielder didn't react immediately, just observed, cold, calculating, the way a trained soldier would assess a battlefield. Draven hated that look, because it meant these bastards still thought they were better. Better than him, better than Soren, better than Viral. Draven clicked his tongue, rolling his shoulders. I've already made my move, he muttered under his breath. His smirk widened as he ducked under another blindingly fast spear thrust. And I'm not about to get left behind. He had put his trust in that crazy bastard. And for better or worse, Draven wasn't the type to let himself get outpaced by some noble-trained killers. The spear wielder lunged again, and this time Draven didn't just dodge. He advanced. His blade clashed against the shaft of the spear, forcing his opponent to react rather than dictate the battle. Draven twisted his body, shifting his weight in a way that shouldn't have been possible mid-motion. Slashing upward, the spear wielder barely managed to angle his weapon to block, his calm expression flickering with something close to surprise. Not bad, Draven muttered, grin sharp as he pressed harder. But you ain't the only one who knows how to fight. To his side, Soren roared, planting his feet before driving his warhammer forward with raw, monstrous force. The axeman braced, blocking with the shaft of his weapon. But this time Soren had adjusted. Rather than push forward, he twisted the momentum, dragging the axe-wielder's balance off-center. It was subtle, but it gave Soren just enough space to pull back and launch a brutal counterstrike toward his opponent's ribs. Viral, too, had stopped purely defending. His movements were still controlled, precise, but now he was testing his opponent, finding weaknesses. The assassin darted in, daggers flashing, but Viral met him with a sudden, unexpected reverse grip parry, deflecting the strike just enough to force an opening. His blade slashed forward. A thin cut opened along the assassin's side. Not deep, not lethal, but a wound nonetheless. The The silver-eyed assassin exhaled sharply, his smirk twitching. TCH. Draven let out a low chuckle as he dodged another strike from the spear wielder, his own blade flicking dangerously close to his opponent's throat. They weren't winning. Not yet. But now they weren't losing either. Chapter 591. Surrender. Just as Draven was about to press forward, his blade dangerously close to slashing across the spear wielder's exposed side. A shift. A violent, unnatural shift. The air trembled. Mana, raw, overwhelming, immense, erupted into the sky from across the city. A pulse so powerful it sent an involuntary shudder through Draven's body. It wasn't just strong, it was suffocating. A clash. A collision of forces so absurd that, for a moment, the battlefield around him felt like it had shrunk, like the true fight was happening somewhere else entirely. Draven instinctively jumped back, disengaging from his opponent as he turned his gaze to the distance, toward the source. And there it was, a pillar of crackling, intertwining energy, two forces colliding. One, sharp and unwavering, controlled but unrelenting. The kind of power that came from years of tempered, disciplined battle. The other, wild, suffocating, endless. Something that refused to be contained. Draven's smirk twitched, even as his chest tightened. Tisich? That bastard. Soren, still locked in combat with the axe-wielder, noticed Draven's sudden distraction and gritted his teeth. Oi, what's with that look? Viral, too, caught the shift, though he remained composed, his blade holding the assassin at bay. That mana! Draven exhaled sharply. His voice was quieter, but filled with something close to grim amusement. Lucavians found Aldrich. The realization settled in the air like a thunderclap. Soren whistled lowly, adjusting his grip on his warhammer. Heh, about time. Viral's eyes flickered with calculation. Then it's out of our hands now. Draven's fingers flexed around his blade. It was true. Whatever was happening there, whatever monstrous battle had just begun, was no longer their concern. Lucavian's job was his own. The only thing left for Draven now was to do his job properly. His smirk returned, sharper than before, his grip tightening on his weapon as he turned back toward his opponent. Guess I better clean up my side of the battlefield. Draven grit his teeth as his blade clashed once more against the spear wielder's strike. Sparks flew from the impact, the sheer force rattling his bones. He pushed forward, trying to gain ground, but the bastard moved with inhuman precision, his spear twisting at the last second to redirect Draven's momentum, forcing him back. The fight wasn't going anywhere. Draven exhaled sharply, taking a step back to reassess. Around him, the battle still raged, but it was wrong. This wasn't the easy cleanup he had planned. Viral was locked in an endless exchange with that damn assassin. Every time he seemed to gain an advantage, the bastard slipped through, attacking from another blind spot. Soren was holding his ground against the axeman, their fight a brutal clash of raw strength. But for every inch Soren gained, the enemy took another back. Draven's gaze flicked across the battlefield. No progress. No ground gained. TCH. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. Where the hell did these fuckers come from? His plan had been simple: Lucavion takes Aldrich and the rest would crumble. But these Empire bastards, they were far more prepared than expected. Draven ducked as the spear came for his throat again, twisting his body at the last second. His blade flashed upward, aiming to sever the bastard's wrist, but he missed. Again. Fucking hell! Draven hissed under his breath, regaining his footing. He didn't like this. Something wasn't right. They had expected resistance, sure, but this was too much. Draven exhaled through his nose, keeping his stance loose, ready to react. His mind worked fast, trying to assess the situation. They couldn't hold this deadlock forever. Something had to change. And soon. Yo! Draven barely had time to register the voice before the axeman in front of him hesitated as well, his gaze snapping toward the rooftops. The brief distraction was all Draven needed to take a step back, his grip tightening around his blade. Lucavion sat lazily on the edge of a rooftop, one knee propped up, his elbow resting against it. His usual smirk was there, his dark eyes flickering with something unreadable. "How's it going?" he asked, his voice carrying easily over the battlefield. Draven stared for a second. He had no words, but inside, relief. Lucavion was alive, and that meant Draven's eyes flicked over Lucavion's appearance, his instincts confirming what his brain had just realized. Blood. Blood was everywhere. Lucavion's coat was soaked in it, the dark fabric sticking to his skin. His arms, his legs. There were deep gashes along his body, some already closing, others still raw. His breathing was steady, but Draven could see it, the exhaustion creeping beneath that easy smirk. Aldrich was dead. Lucavion had won. Draven wanted to laugh, to smirk, to spit something smug at the enemy still standing before him, but he didn't get the chance, because the spear-wielding bastard didn't look away. Unlike the others, he didn't react to Lucavion's arrival. He didn't hesitate, didn't turn to confirm what had happened. He struck. Draven barely raised his sword in time as the spear came for his ribs, the sheer force of the attack rattling his arms. He dug his feet in, twisting just enough to keep the blow from skewering him outright. "Tsh bastard," Draven hissed. Lucavion exhaled softly from above, shaking his head. "No rest for the weary, huh?" He spoke. The spearman shifted slightly, stiffening. A strange, eerie aura seeped from Lucavion. Something neither light nor dark, just wrong. The air around him felt like a void, a place where laws didn't apply. The spearman's grip on his weapon tightened instinctively. This feeling, Lucavion barely spared him a glance. Instead, he took a breath and, "Yo!" The members of the Black Veil. His voice cut through the battlefield like a whip. The fighting stalled. For just a second, steel stopped clashing, footsteps hesitated, and wary eyes turned toward him. Lucavion stood on the rooftop, still smirking. His posture relaxed despite the clear exhaustion in his body. Blood still dripped from his coat, staining the tiles beneath his feet. And then he tossed something. A severed head hit the ground with a sickening thud. Silence. The head rolled slightly before settling, its blood pooling over the cracked stone. And even in death, Aldrich Veltrin's face was unmistakable. The moment the Black Veil members recognized it, a ripple of raw shock spread through their ranks. Some faltered, others stiffened. A few took a single step back. Lucavion grinned, wiping a smear of blood from his cheek. "Took me a while, but your boss is gone." A cold wind swept through the street, carrying the scent of blood and death. For the first time in the battle, Lucavion's voice rang out through the battlefield, smooth and effortless, but dripping with lethal intent. "Now, do you guys want to surrender? Or do you want me to slaughter every one of you here?" And then he let it loose. The bloodlust, a crushing, suffocating wave of sheer killing intent flooded the battlefield, pressing down on every soul present. The air itself seemed to shrink, the very space around them warping beneath the weight of something that wasn't just menace, but certainty. This wasn't the empty bravado of a man trying to intimidate his enemies. This was a man who had already decided the outcome. Draven barely resisted the urge to shift his stance. He had felt many types of bloodlust before, sharp, cold, brutal, but this, Lucavion's, was different. It wasn't wild. It wasn't unrestrained. It was measured, precise, absolute. And the Black Veil felt it. First silence. And then, clank. A sword hit the ground. Then another. Clank, clank, clank. One by one, weapons slipped from trembling hands, hitting the blood-stained streets. Some of them stepped back, others outright collapsed to their knees, gasping for air. Because in that moment they understood. Their leader was dead, and the monster standing before them had been the one to do it. Chapter 592. Figure. Black Veil's base. Right before the fight was over, the room was dim, illuminated only by the soft glow of a single enchanted lantern resting on the polished ebony desk. A faint hum of mana pulsed through the air, the only indication that this chamber was not as simple as it appeared. The thick stone walls, reinforced with protective runes, ensured absolute privacy. No stray ears, no lingering eyes. The figure stood near the desk, his posture composed, his gaze lowered in deference. In front of him, a small, levitating communication crystal pulsed with soft, rhythmic light. Then, a voice, low, steady, but absolute. A voice that carried the weight of command, of a power that did not need to be raised to be felt. Yes, Your Majesty. The figure's tone was unwavering, a perfect mask of obedience. Everything is going well. A pause. Then the voice from the crystal responded, smooth yet edged with quiet authority. Good. The word carried weight, a silent expectation woven into a single syllable. The voice continued, its cadence deliberate, unwavering. We need Varenthia and the trade routes under our control. I don't want any discrepancies. The figure inclined his head slightly. There will be none. The glow of the crystal flickered, pulsing in time with the voice's next words. Aldrich. The figure's expression remained calm, composed, as he delivered his next words. He is doing fine. His tone was measured, devoid of urgency, but laced with quiet assurance. While it is true that his unruly nature surfaces from time to time, it is nothing beyond our expectations. For now, it serves our needs rather than hinders them. A brief silence followed. Then the voice in the crystal responded, its cadence smooth, calculated. I knew Aldrich was someone like this. There was no hint of surprise in the statement, only a quiet amusement, as if the speaker had long understood the nature of the man they had chosen. But that is fine. Someone like that is needed for a place like Varenthia. A brute with a sharp mind, unshackled by useless notions of nobility, yet still bound by the hunger for power. That kind of ambition will stabilize our hold. The figure inclined his head slightly. As expected of Your Highness, the Crown Prince. Your foresight is unparalleled. His voice carried the perfect amount of reverence, neither too eager nor too subdued, striking that delicate balance of deference that only a man of his caliber could maintain. The crystal flickered, a sign that the connection was nearing its end. Continue to monitor things, the Crown Prince said, his voice distant now, as if his mind had already moved on to the next grand plan. Ensure that Aldrich does not stray too far. He is useful, but only if he remains within our grasp. The figure nodded once more, ready to seal the conversation. But then, something shifted. A sharp, unnatural pulse. The artifact in his pocket shook. A deep, unnatural vibration trembled through the air, an omen of something wrong. The figure's body stiffened, his hand darting to his coat, gripping the artifact tightly as he pulled it free. The runes along its surface were glowing erratic, pulsing like a dying heart. What? His voice, usually composed, cracked. How can this be? The crystal flickered, and the Crown Prince's voice cut through the sudden tension. Did something happen? The figure could barely breathe. His fingers tightened around the artifact, his pulse roaring in his ears as the runes continued to twist and distort, as if the very foundation of what they were meant to track had been shattered. His voice came out in a whisper, hoarse and disbelieving. Your Majesty, Aldrich. The artifact pulsed one last time, and then it stopped, cold, silent. Aldrich is dead. The figure's grip on the artifact tightened as he lifted it to eye level, his mind racing. The gem was no longer shining, not flickering, not dimming, just dead. The artifact that had always pulsed with Aldrich's presence, that had tracked his every movement through the city, was now as lifeless as cold stone. He exhaled sharply, trying to steady his thoughts. Then, from the communication crystal, stay calm. The Crown Prince's voice cut through the panic like a sharpened blade, commanding, firm. Explain. How can he be dead? Didn't you ensure that no threat would occur? The figure forced himself to inhale, to steady his voice. We did. We made sure of it. His fingers dug into the gemstone's surface. The artifact detects every high-level fighter entering Varenthia. If anyone strong enough to kill Aldrich had entered the city, we would have known. A pause. A deadly, suffocating pause. Then explain. The Crown Prince's voice was colder now, edged with something that made the figure's throat tighten. How is he dead? His mind churned through the possibilities, grasping at answers, but there was only one truth. I don't know. The words tasted bitter, because they should have known. They should have seen this coming. Aldrich was a six-star awakened, a force of nature in battle, not a man who could simply be cut down in the streets like some common mercenary. And yet, the artifact was dead, meaning Aldrich was dead, which meant something was in Varenthia that their artifact had not detected. And that was an impossibility, unless the figure's breath slowed, unless what had killed Aldrich was not something the artifact could track. The silence that followed was suffocating. The figure kept his head bowed, his grip tightening around the lifeless artifact as if willing it to spark back to life, to prove that this was all some sort of temporary malfunction. But the stone remained cold, its once vibrant pulse extinguished as if it had never held a trace of Aldrich's presence at all. The Crown Prince's voice cut through the silence like a sharpened blade. You don't know? It was quiet, measured, but beneath that forced composure was something far more dangerous. Rage. The figure swallowed, choosing his next words carefully. Your Highness, I swear we have accounted for every variable. The artifact is absolute in its detection. No strong presence has entered Varenthia without our knowledge. There should be no force capable of killing Aldrich, not without us knowing. Then explain why I am being told that he is dead. The Crown Prince's words landed like hammer blows, each one pressing the weight of responsibility deeper into the figure's chest. He exhaled, trying to regain his focus, trying to think. It doesn't make sense, he admitted, his voice lower now, laced with frustration he had no right to show. But for now, we must investigate before we conclude anything. I will send men out immediately. If Aldrich truly is dead, then we will find out who is responsible. The silence on the other end of the crystal stretched, taut with unspoken threats. Then, finally, the Crown Prince spoke again, his tone colder, sharper than before. I refuse to believe that Aldrich is dead. The figure stiffened, not daring to interrupt. He was not a fool, the Crown Prince continued, voice unwavering. Aldrich was a warrior of his own making, a man who clawed his way up with sheer will. For him to simply disappear without a trace, without even a whisper of a greater power behind it. No, that is not something I will accept. The figure hesitated for a fraction of a second before nodding. Then I will confirm it myself. I will find proof. If he is dead, the Crown Prince continued, his voice dropping just slightly, turning more insidious, then I expect the name of the one responsible. I don't care who they are. I don't care what it takes. But I will have an answer. The figure let out a slow breath, pressing his free hand against the desk to steady himself. Understood, Your Highness. Another heavy pause. Then, a final parting remark, delivered in a tone that sent an undeniable chill through the room. I will not tolerate any failure. The connection ended. The glow from the crystal faded into nothingness, leaving the chamber darker, colder. The figure remained still for a long moment, staring down at the dead artifact in his hands. His pulse was steady, his expression unreadable, but in the quiet of the room, one truth settled heavily in his mind. The fight was over. With Aldrich's severed head lying in the dirt and Lucavion's blood-drenched figure standing above them, the black veil's will to fight shattered. The clatter of weapons falling to the ground continued, one after another. Surrender. Even the strongest among them, those who had fought tooth and nail against Draven, Viral, and Soren, had no choice but to yield. The spear-wielding warrior, the silent axeman, and the swift assassin. They all stood still, their eyes sharp but resigned. They weren't fools. They had fought hard, but the war had already been decided. Draven exhaled sharply, rolling his shoulders. Tsh. Finally, Viral adjusted his coat, flicking the blood off his blade before sheathing it. A clean ending. Soren let out a rough chuckle, gripping his warhammer like he wasn't quite ready to let go yet. Shame. I was just getting warmed up. Lucavion, still standing atop the rooftop, gave a lazy stretch, his smirk unwavering. Well, you could always fight me next if you're that eager. Soren immediately scoffed. TCH. I like keeping my head attached to my shoulders, thanks. Draven ran a hand through his hair before turning to his men. Round up the prisoners. Take the high rankers to the underground cells. The rest? Strip them of weapons, lock them up for now. We'll decide what to do with them later. His men nodded and moved swiftly, restraining the surviving Black Veil fighters. The 3 strongest Aldrich's lieutenants offered no resistance as they were bound in heavy mana-restricting chains. Draven eyed them carefully, watching their expressions. Not broken, not afraid, just waiting. They're still dangerous, he thought. They would need careful handling. Still, it didn't matter. Not today. The city belonged to them now. Chapter 593, Gratitude. The scent of blood still lingered in the air as Draven, Viral, and Soren sat in the dimly lit meeting hall. Their victory had been swift and brutal. Now came the part that really mattered. Lucavion entered the room last, his steps slow and unhurried. He looked like a man who had already moved past the battle, as if the blood soaking his coat and the wounds still healing across his skin were minor inconveniences, nothing more. He dropped himself into the nearest chair, exhaling lightly. Draven leaned forward, his gray eyes sharp. So? Lucavion tilted his head slightly. So? Soren let out a short laugh. You really fucking did it, huh? Viral remained silent, studying Lucavion carefully. Draven sighed, rubbing his temple. Aldrich's gone. The Black Veil's crushed. Varenthia's ours. Lucavion leaned back in his chair, exhaling slowly. The exhaustion was creeping into his bones now, dull and heavy. But his expression remained the same, calm, unreadable, just the barest hint of amusement lingering at the edge of his lips. He stretched his fingers, rolling his shoulders slightly before speaking. Things may not be that simple, he muttered. Draven frowned. What do you mean? Lucavion closed his eyes for a second, collecting his thoughts. Aldrich was affiliated with the royal family. That's not something you just walk away from. He opened his eyes, looking directly at Draven. If they had plans for this city, then this may not be over. Soren clicked his tongue, shaking his head. Fucking great. Just when I thought we were done. Viral exhaled through his nose, his fingers steepled in thought. It's worth considering, but we have no reason to assume immediate retaliation. The royal family wouldn't move for someone like Aldrich alone. He wasn't a noble anymore, he was a tool they discarded once. The question is whether his work here was part of something bigger. Draven leaned back, his smirk returning slightly. Well, we'll think about that later. Lucavion hummed in response, as if he had already moved past the conversation. Draven studied him for a moment before tilting his head. So, now what? Lucavion raised an eyebrow. What do you mean? Draven smirked. What are you planning to do now? Lucavion exhaled softly, stretching one arm. I have no other business here, he said smoothly. So I'll be leaving. Draven blinked. Already? Lucavion glanced at him, smirking. What? Now you're fond of me? Draven scoffed, rolling his eyes. Lucavion tilted his head slightly, voice dropping into a teasing drawl. I'm sorry, but I'm not into men. Soren immediately burst into laughter. Viral let out a slow sigh, pinching the bridge of his nose. Draven just stared at Lucavion for a long moment, unblinking. Then, finally, he muttered, TCH. Draven let out a sharp exhale, shaking his head. You and your fucking mouth. Lucavion smirked, completely unbothered. Soren, still chuckling, wiped at the corner of his eye. Shit. I actually think I'll miss you, bastard. Viral exhaled through his nose, setting his hands on the table. Before you go, he said smoothly, there's something we need to address. Lucavion raised an eyebrow. Oh. Draven leaned forward, resting his forearms on the table. You helped us take Varenthia. Whether it was for your own reasons or not, we came out of this a hell of a lot stronger than before. He tilted his head slightly. And that doesn't go unpaid. Lucavion hummed, watching them with mild curiosity. Soren smirked. A reward, basically. Lucavion chuckled. I don't recall asking for one. Viral met his gaze, unwavering. Consider it a matter of principle. Draven exhaled sharply. You took care of Aldrich. We took care of the rest. And now Varenthia belongs to us. That means it's only fair we acknowledge the bastard who made it possible. Lucavion drummed his fingers against the table. Ho? So generous all of a sudden. Draven rolled his eyes. TCH. Don't make this weird. Lucavion smirked, but he didn't immediately decline. His gaze flicked between them, considering. All right, he mused. I'll bite. What are you offering? Draven exhaled, leaning back in his chair. Since you're so damn eager to leave, let's get this over with. Lucavion smirked but said nothing as Draven reached into his coat and pulled out the same old, metal case from before. With a lazy flick of his fingers, he slid it across the table. Lucavion caught it effortlessly, raising an eyebrow. Oh? This again. Draven nodded. That artifact, it's yours now. Lucavion tapped the case once, thoughtful. Didn't you say this thing was stolen from some noble family's vault? Draven scoffed. Yeah, so? Not like I'm going to use it. Besides, you got more out of it than I ever did. Might as well leave it with the bastard who actually made it work. Lucavion chuckled, flipping the case open briefly. The artifact still pulsed with faint, irregular light, proof of its defective yet intriguing nature. He snapped it shut and tucked it away. Not bad. Soren grinned, setting a large, heavy pouch onto the table with a solid thud. Gold, he said simply. Enough to get you through a few months of good living. Or a few weeks if you're the type to waste it on drinks and women. Lucavion smirked, resting his chin against his knuckles. Tempting. Maybe I'll see how quickly I can burn through it. Viral sighed, but instead of commenting on Lucavion's attitude, he placed a small, intricately carved box onto the table. Lucavion's sharp gaze flicked toward it. Viral's voice was calm, measured. A vial of ether mist. Rare, expensive, and difficult to acquire. Lucavion's sharp gaze flicked toward the vial, his fingers lightly tracing the edge of the box before lifting it. The silver-blue liquid inside shimmered under the dim candlelight, its luster almost unnatural. Ether mist, a rare alchemical concoction, something whispered about in the underground but rarely ever seen. Some claimed it could increase a person's affinity with magic. Others believed it could awaken dormant abilities. But the truth? It wasn't as mystical as the rumors made it out to be. It's a mana veins enhancer, Lucavion murmured, tilting the vial slightly as the liquid swirled within. Speeds up cultivation, helps breakthroughs. Draven let out a low whistle. Ha! Something like that could make a difference in cultivating. Soren frowned slightly, crossing his arms. And you're just giving it away? Viral remained composed. I am. Marcial, who had been silent up until now, finally spoke, his shrewd gaze flicking toward Viral. Are you sure about this? Ether mist isn't something people just hand out. You wouldn't rather keep it for yourself. Viral exhaled slowly, shaking his head. I've been stuck at 5-star for over 10 years, he admitted, his voice even matter-of-fact. And I know I'll remain that way until the day I die. Draven's smirk faded slightly as he studied the older man. Viral continued, his fingers steepled before him. I've tested my limits. I know where they are. Ether mist won't change that. Lucavion's expression was unreadable as he flicked the vial once, watching the light bend through the liquid. Then you're wasting it on me, he said smoothly. Viral's lips curled into the faintest smirk. Am I? Lucavion tilted his head slightly, amused. Viral leaned forward just slightly, his sharp eyes locked onto Lucavion's. You, on the other hand, don't seem like someone who's anywhere near his limit. Silence. For a moment, the weight of Viral's words lingered in the air. Then, Lucavion let out a soft chuckle, tucking the vial away inside his coat. Well then, he murmured. Guess we'll see. Lucavion turned, prepared to make his exit, but just as he stepped toward the door. "Wait!" Draven's voice stopped him. Lucavion exhaled softly, tilting his head slightly as he glanced back. Draven tossed something toward him. Lucavion caught it effortlessly, his fingers closing around 3 small, solid objects. When he opened his palm, he found 3 tokens, each distinct, each carrying an insignia he hadn't seen before. His dark eyes flickered with curiosity. "What's this?" Draven smirked, leaning back into his chair. "That one in the middle," he gestured toward the first token, "belongs to the Shadowmark Syndicate. You ever need information, tracking, records, a person found, take it to any of their branches. Show that token and they'll listen." Lucavion hummed, turning it between his fingers. "Oh?" His smirk twitched, a hint of amusement in his voice. "So, an organization of rats?" Marcille scoffed. "Information brokers, if you want to be polite about it." Lucavion chuckled but didn't argue. His eyes moved to the other 2 tokens. They were different in shape and insignia. He glanced up at Soren and Viral. "And these?" Soren grunted, arms crossed. "That one's mine. Crimson Dog's sigil. We don't do favors, but if you ever need some muscle, flash that and we'll hear you out." Viral's gaze was calm as he spoke. "And mine, that's from the Duskren Pact. My men don't move often, but when they do, it's efficient. If there's ever a situation that calls for precision rather than brute force, that token will open doors for you." Lucavion studied them for a moment. Then, slowly, his smirk widened. Well. He rolled the tokens over his knuckles with an easy flick of his fingers. "Didn't realize I was making so many friends." Draven scoffed. "TCH. Don't get ahead of yourself. Consider it a professional courtesy. You helped us clean up this mess, so it's only right you get something out of it." Lucavion tucked the tokens away into his coat. "How generous!" Viral exhaled. "Are you actually leaving now?" Lucavion stretched slightly. "Unless you plan to keep me here?" Soren chuckled. "Tempting." Draven smirked. "You are an amusing bastard." Lucavion turned toward the door once more, lifting a hand in a lazy half-wave. "It's been fun." Draven watched him for a moment, then exhaled, shaking his head. "Crazy bastard." Chapter 594. A Past That Has Been Faced. Lucavion walked through the dimly lit streets of Varenthia, the cold night air settling over him like a second skin. The echoes of the city had quieted now, the chaos of battle nothing more than a memory painted in blood and smoke. The weight of exhaustion pressed into his bones, but his steps remained steady, his posture as effortless as ever. Above him, the sky stretched vast and starless. No comforting light, no celestial glow to guide him. Only the remnants of a long night and the distant hum of a city in transition. And then, they were courteous. Vital Yara's voice drifted into his mind, smooth yet contemplative. Not something you would expect from mere bandits. Lucavion chuckled softly. It is often those who face the hardships of the world that show the most courtesy. Vitaliera fell silent. Lucavion exhaled, his fingers brushing over the inside of his coat where the tokens lay, nestled alongside the vial of ether mist. A reward, a recognition of his part in this city's shift in power. But none of it felt particularly important right now, because, despite everything, despite the smirk he had worn, despite the ease with which he had accepted their gifts, his body hurt. A deep, lingering ache settled in his limbs, the toll of the battle creeping through his every movement. His core, though stabilized, was sealed. He could feel its absence, like a limb that had gone numb but had yet to be severed. It wasn't pain, not exactly, but something close, something he didn't quite have the words for. "I have a lot of questions, Lucavion." "I know you do." His tone was quieter now, lacking its usual teasing edge. "I will answer them now." His pace didn't falter as he made his way back to the residence Draven had arranged for him. Lucavion pushed open the heavy wooden door, stepping into the dimly lit interior of the residence. The warmth of the place greeted him instantly, a a stark contrast to the cold streets outside. His gaze flicked around the spacious, lavishly furnished rooms. Gold-trimmed decor, fine velvet drapes, furniture that belonged in the estates of nobles rather than the hideout of a crime lord. Even after spending time here, it still amused him how absurdly extravagant Draven's tastes were. However, something was different this time. Caius wasn't here. Lucavion's eyes narrowed slightly as he scanned the room. Normally, the man would have been lounging somewhere, either drinking or looking like he had just barely survived yet another disaster. But now, gone. Lucavion exhaled lightly, rolling his shoulders. Well, let's hope that he's alive. Though, a smirk tugged at his lips. He does have the luck of a cockroach. With that, he made his way deeper into the residence, heading toward the one place he had been looking forward to since the moment his body started aching. The bath, one of the few luxuries worth indulging in. Draven's absurd wealth had at least been put to good use here. The bathhouse attached to the residence was massive, practically a private sanctuary, lined with intricate magical engravings. The water's temperature could be adjusted instantly. Hot, cold, anything in between, and enchanted herbs infused the steam with a subtle, refreshing scent. Lucavion stepped inside, the faint mist curling around him as he moved. The warmth in the air seeped into his skin even before he touched the water, soothing the weariness clinging to his limbs. Slowly, he peeled off his coat, then the rest of his tattered, blood-stained clothing, letting each piece fall carelessly to the floor. The moment he did, "I am monitoring your condition." Lucavion paused, one brow arching slightly. Then, a smirk. "Are you sure you don't just want to peek at this body of mine?" His voice was laced with playful arrogance as he tilted his head slightly. You're making me shy, Vitaliera." Silence. Instead, "Humph. Believe what you want." Lucavion chuckled under his breath. Lucavion simply shook his head, a quiet chuckle escaping his lips. "I don't mind it," he said smoothly, rolling his shoulders as he stepped forward. "If my body is that fascinating, who am I to deny you the view? TCH? Arrogant bastard." His smirk lingered as he finally let his posture ease, allowing the warm mist to settle around him. Now that his clothes were off, his body, every scar, every mark of battle was fully exposed. And there were many. Old wounds, long since healed, crisscrossed his skin like a history carved into flesh. Some were faint, barely noticeable unless one looked closely. Others were deeper, jagged, remnants of battles that had pushed him to the brink. But the freshest ones, the ones from his fight with Aldrich, still lingered. The burns, the bruises, the slashes that had been carved into him with mana-infused strikes. Those wounds didn't just fade with time. Injuries laced with another person's mana were always harder to heal. The foreign energy resisted outside interference, clinging to his wounds like a stubborn parasite. Lucavion had experienced it before. He was used to it. Didn't mean it wasn't annoying. He exhaled lightly, stepping into the bath. The water was hot, perfectly so, its temperature shaped by the engravings that ran along the marble floor. The moment it touched his skin, a deep, satisfying warmth seeped into his muscles, easing the exhaustion that clung to him like a second skin. Then, as he fully lowered himself into the water, he let out a quiet, drawn-out moan. Just the right amount of breathy, just enough to sound a little too pleased. And, Lucavion. Vitaliara's voice snapped through his mind, sharp and immediate. Lucavion grinned. "Ho? What's wrong?" He tilted his head slightly, his smirk growing. "I was just expressing my appreciation for the bath. You're not getting flustered, are you? I will kill you." Lucavion laughed, low and rich, leaning back against the smooth edge of the bath. Now, he murmured, closing his eyes, his voice dripping with amusement. "What happened to monitoring my condition? I am monitoring it, and I'd rather not hear you making those sounds while I do it." Lucavion exhaled, his grin softening slightly. Teasing her was always too easy, but there was something oddly comforting about their exchange. Like, despite everything, Despite the battle, despite his sealed core, despite the weight pressing down on him, he could still be himself. He let his body sink further into the warmth, feeling the tension in his muscles begin to unwind. "Fine, fine," he murmured, stretching slightly. "I'll behave. You better." A pause. Then, quieter. "Are the injuries still bothering you?" Lucavion's smirk faded just slightly. He opened one eye, glancing at the faint scars running across his arms. The lingering traces of Aldrich's mana still pulsed faintly in the deeper wounds, resisting the warmth of the bath. He inhaled slowly. "It'll pass." Vitaliera didn't respond immediately. Then, "You're used to pain." It wasn't a question. Lucavion let out a quiet chuckle, tilting his head back against the stone. "It's a familiar companion." Another pause. "Humph. Idiot." Lucavion simply smiled. Vitaliera settled into one of the cushioned seats near the edge of the bath, her golden fur illuminated softly by the warm light flickering from the enchanted lanterns above. She curled her tail around herself, her posture deceptively relaxed, though Lucavion knew better. She was waiting. Her sharp eyes never left him, unwavering in their quiet demand. Lucavion stretched, letting the water soak into his aching muscles, before finally tilting his head toward her with a lazy smirk. "Bring it on." Vitaliera didn't hesitate. "Aldrich Venthorin. He called you the boy with the scarred eye." Lucavion's smirk didn't fade, but something in his gaze shifted ever so slightly. "Yes." A beat of silence passed between them before she finally asked, What happened?" Her voice wasn't just curious, it was searching. Lucavion exhaled, running a hand through his damp hair. "That's a long story." His tone was light, teasing, but there was something in the way he said it that made it clear. This wasn't just a tale to be told over a drink. "I want to hear everything." Lucavion tilted his head slightly, amusement flickering across his features. "Oh?" His voice carried the usual mischief, but there was an edge of something else beneath it. Something unreadable. Something from the past. Chapter 595. A past that has been faced, too. Lucavion leaned his head back against the smooth stone edge of the bath, his damp hair clinging slightly to his skin. The warmth seeped into his bones, but it did nothing to ease the weight settling over him now. He exhaled slowly, tilting his head just enough to glance at Vitaliera. Her gaze was expectant, unwavering. No turning back now. So he began. "I was a soldier." Vitaliera's ears flicked slightly. "Soldier?" Lucavion hummed lightly. "Yes, soldier." "When?" She sounded skeptical. "You're not even that old." Lucavion's smirk curled at the edges, but there was no real amusement behind it. "When I was 14. Silence. Vitaliera's eyes widened just slightly, but she didn't speak immediately. She didn't have to. Lucavion could feel the question forming, the weight of her unspoken thoughts pressing against him like the steam curling through the air. 14. Too young. Far too young. But this wasn't a story of childhood. No, this was war. Lucavion exhaled, closing his eyes briefly before opening them again. "And that's where it all began." Vitaliera's tail twitched, her ears flattening slightly as she absorbed his words. "Why?" Her voice was firm, but beneath it was something softer, something cautious. "Why were you a soldier at 14? How did that happen?" Lucavion's expression didn't change immediately, but for a single, fleeting moment his eyes did. The usual glint of mischief, the lazy arrogance that colored his words, vanished. Instead, cold, detached, a glimpse of something locked away, buried deep beneath layers of careful control. Then, just as quickly, it shifted again, melancholy bleeding into his gaze, something distant, something lost in the past. He exhaled softly, rolling his shoulders. Circumstances made it so. Vitaliera didn't accept that. Circumstances? Her voice pressed against him, insistent. "What circumstances? You said you would answer my questions." Lucavion tilted his head slightly, his smirk returning, but it was subdued now, laced with something unreadable. "I am answering." he murmured. If you let me. Vitaliera narrowed her eyes. Then tell me. Lucavion closed his eyes for a brief moment, inhaling deeply before exhaling through his nose. Let's not focus on unimportant details. Vitaliara's ears twitched. Unimportant? You were a soldier at 14, Lucavion. How is that unimportant? Lucavion chuckled under his breath, shaking his head. Because it doesn't change anything. It changes everything. His smirk lingered, but he didn't argue. Instead, his gaze lifted to the ceiling, his voice quieter now. Lucavion's gaze remained fixed on the ceiling, his expression unreadable. The warmth of the bath did little to ease the weight pressing against him now, the weight of a past he rarely spoke of. His voice was quieter when he finally spoke again. I was sent to war as a criminal. Vitaliara's ears twitched. Criminal? Her voice sharpened. For what crime? Lucavion didn't answer immediately. His jaw tightened ever so slightly, but then, he exhaled, shaking his head lightly. Vitaliera narrowed her eyes but didn't press him further. She let out a short breath. Fine. I won't pester you. Just continue. Lucavion's lips curled into something resembling a smirk, but it lacked the usual amusement. How generous of you! A brief silence settled between them before he continued. They sent me to the battlefield as punishment. And since I was both young and a so-called criminal, my first battalion wasn't exactly welcoming. Vitaliara's eyes darkened slightly. They didn't treat you well. Lucavion let out a low chuckle, but there was no real humor in it. I wasn't in a good state either, so it wasn't much of a surprise. His fingers traced the surface of the water absent-mindedly. In the first few months, I barely scraped by. Surviving in a war zone isn't about skill. It's about not being in the wrong place at the wrong time. I learned that fast. He tilted his head slightly, his dark eyes glinting with something distant. At that time, I wasn't an awakened either. Vitaliara's ears twitched again. Then, Lucavion exhaled, closing his eyes for a brief moment. Then, he murmured, I met the first people who ever showed me kindness there. Lucavion's gaze remained fixed on the rippling surface of the water, his fingers tracing idle patterns as he spoke. His voice had lost its usual playfulness. There was no teasing, no amusement, just something quieter, something reflective. It was then, he murmured, when my squad was changed. Vitaliera remained silent, waiting. Lucavion exhaled, his eyes flickering with something distant. That's where I met them. Met them? Yeah. His voice softened just slightly. Matteo, Felix, Garrett, Elias, and Clara. The names hung in the air, weighty with something unspoken. Who were they? Lucavion tilted his head back, letting the warmth of the bath soak into his weary muscles. But his thoughts were no longer here. They were somewhere else. A battlefield long past. They were the first people who didn't care about my so-called crimes, he said lightly, though his voice carried something deeper. Didn't care about the rumors surrounding me. They just accepted me as I was. For the first time in a long while, he could still picture them. Garrett, the one who had been a blacksmith before the war stole that life from him. His hands were rough, his voice gruff, but beneath that exterior he had been steady, a mentor of sorts. He never looked at Lucavion like the others did, never with suspicion, never with contempt. Matteo, the one who always spoke of home, of the family waiting for him, a wife, 2 children, a man hardened by war but softened when he spoke of them. His sharp mind had kept them alive more times than Lucavion could count. Felix, the thief, the troublemaker, the one with the mischievous grin and quick hands, always slipping something from someone's pocket, even in the middle of a war zone. But beneath the playful arrogance was a deep, bitter hatred for the nobles who had ruined his family, for the world that had taken everything from him. Clara, fierce, stubborn. She had joined the army to escape, to carve out a new life with her own hands. She never let anyone dictate her fate, never let anyone tell her what she could or couldn't be. She had been reckless, sometimes too much so. but she had never been afraid. And Elias, the scholar, the quiet one, he wasn't built for war, not in the way the others were, but his mind was sharper than any blade. He read battlefields the way others read books, saw patterns in chaos, found answers when there were none. Lucavion exhaled through his nose, a ghost of a smirk on his lips. Back then I wasn't an awakened. I wasn't strong. I was just another body thrown into a war I didn't ask for. His voice was light, but there was something beneath it, a quiet weight. And they were the ones who taught me how to survive. Sounds like good people. Vital Yara's voice was quiet, almost mumbled. Her golden eyes flickered with something unreadable as she curled her tail slightly around herself. They might not have been good in the eyes of the Empire or its laws, but they were good to you. Lucavion exhaled, his smirk softening just slightly. They were. A beat of silence passed between them, the warm mist curling gently in the air. Then, I see. Then? Lucavion's eyes darkened slightly. Then, he murmured, everything went down. The words hung in the air, heavy with something inevitable. It was just another day of fighting on the front lines, holding the Valerius plains. Our squad was working as usual. The same routine, the same strategies. His fingers traced the surface of the water, as if following the shape of an old memory. And then, the day before, Clara awakened. Vital Yara's ears perked slightly. She did. Lucavion hummed. Yeah, a full awakening. We were all celebrating, quietly of course, since there wasn't much time for that. But it was a moment, a rare one. A flicker of something crossed his face, gone as quickly as it had come. We were planning a small surprise for the team on the battlefield, he continued, his voice lighter, almost amused, just to inform the team that we know had an awakened rising from our ranks. His smirk faded. But then, Vital Yara's breath hitched. She already knew. Aldrich. Did he? Lucavion chuckled, but it was hollow. Well, you can guess, can't you? The water around him felt colder now. The Arcanes side was the first to send the awakened onto the battlefield. His voice was smooth, too smooth, as if he were merely reciting a fact instead of recalling a memory burned into his very core. And that. He let the words settle, his fingers tightening slightly against the stone edge of the bath. It wasn't even a fight. His gaze was distant now, lost in a battlefield long gone. It was just a one-sided massacre. Chapter 596. A past that has been faced. 3. Lucavion's voice remained steady, but something in his tone had shifted. Something colder, something distant. As if he was no longer speaking from a warm bath in the present but standing once more on the blood-soaked fields of Valerius, where everything had gone wrong. They fell one by one, he murmured. I saw it happen right in front of me, and I couldn't do anything. Vitaliera didn't speak. She simply listened. Garrett was first. The name hung in the air for a second before Lucavion continued, his fingers tightening against the stone ledge of the bath. The moment I realized the enemy's rank, the moment I understood what we were dealing with, it was already too late. The words were too calm, too controlled, like he had told himself the story over and over again, smoothing out the raw edges of grief, hammering it into something cold and sharp. The knight, Aldrich, vanished from his spot. A pause. And then, swoosh, Lucavion's body tensed, the memory sharp as a blade. Before Garrett even realized what was happening, the spear was already through his chest. No chance to react. No chance to fight back. Just over. Vital Yara's tail curled slightly, but she said nothing. Then Matteo. Another breath. Another name carved into the past. He didn't even see it coming. His throat. Lucavion made a small flicking motion with his fingers. Slit open in a blur of green light. Dead before his body even hit the ground. Vital Yara's ears flattened. Felix tried to fight. Tried to do something. But he didn't last any longer. One strike. Straight through the heart. Lucavion exhaled slowly. Elias swung his weapon, tried to block, but he was too slow. Aldrich parried and ended it instantly. One by one. Cut down like nothing. None of them could fight back. None of them stood a chance. They weren't awakened. Just ordinary soldiers, standing in front of something beyond them. Vitalyara's breath was barely audible. And you? Lucavion's smirk was bitter. I was still on the ground, watching. The warmth of the bath felt distant now. It all happened so fast. A few seconds. That was all it took to erase them. He closed his eyes briefly, his fingers digging into his palm. I tried to move, but my body wouldn't let you. Lucavion chuckled, hollow. Yeah, it refused. My instincts. They told me to stay still, to not draw attention, to not die. But you didn't want to stay still. He exhaled, shaking his head. Of course not. A pause. And then Clara. Vitalyara's entire body tensed. But she didn't interrupt. She stood her ground, Lucavion murmured. Even when she saw what happened to the others. Even when she knew she had no chance. He could still see it. Clara, her hands trembling but glowing with mana. Her voice, shaking but fierce. Stay back. A desperate stand. A refusal to simply accept it. And Aldrich. Lucavion's grip on the stone edge tightened. He mocked her. He toyed with her. Watched as she tried to gather more mana. As she tried to fight back. A bitter chuckle escaped his lips. And then he ended it. Just like that. Swoosh. Stab. The spear piercing her abdomen. Twisting cruelly. Her body crumpling. The blood pooling at her feet. I screamed her name, Lucavion murmured. But it didn't matter. Nothing I did mattered. Silence. Vitalyara finally spoke, her voice quieter than before. And Aldrich turned to you. Lucavion's smirk returned. But it was sharp. He looked at me like I was interesting. That was it. Not a threat. Not an enemy. Just. His fingers traced the scar along his face. The boy with the scarred eye. This scar. Was that his doing? Yes. I see. Then what? What? And he let you live? Lucavion's voice dropped to a whisper. Yeah. Why? Lucavion let out a slow breath, his fingers tracing the rim of the bath absent-mindedly. He let me live, he murmured. And for a long time I wondered why. His voice was even, but there was something beneath it. Something old, something worn from being turned over in his mind too many times. Vitalyara remained silent, waiting. I thought about it again and again. Was it pity? Was it amusement? Did he see something in me back then? His smirk was sharp, but there was no humor in it. But now that I've met him again, I know. A pause. He thought I wouldn't survive. Vitalyara's ears flicked slightly, but she didn't speak. Lucavion exhaled, rolling his shoulders against the warmth of the water. He must have figured I'd die soon after. Alone, broken, swallowed by the battlefield. His dark eyes glinted. And if I didn't, then he must have wanted me to fall into despair. His voice dropped, quieter now. Most likely, he wanted to feel entertained. Vitalyara frowned slightly. Entertained. Lucavion chuckled, but it was hollow. He was a 5-star awakened, sent to a battlefield filled with ordinary soldiers. Do you think he wanted to be there? Silence stretched between them. From the eyes of someone like him, Lucavion mused. Killing non-awakened must have felt like stepping on ants. Effortless. Boring. A waste of his time. Vitalyara's tail curled slightly. Then he left you there as a game? Lucavion tilted his head back, his smirk lazy but cold. Something like that. A flicker of memory. The weight of a spear pressed against his throat. The amusement in Aldrich's gaze. The way he had simply walked away, as if Lucavion had already been erased. He probably thought I'd crumble, that I'd break apart like the rest. Lucavion's fingers tightened ever so slightly against the stone ledge. But he was wrong. Vitalyara didn't say anything. She just watched him. Lucavion could feel it, the weight of her silence. Not judgment, not pity, just understanding. He let out a slow breath, leaning his head back against the stone, the warmth of the bath doing little to ease the memories. For a while, he murmured, I lived solely for revenge. The words weren't dramatic, weren't heavy with grief or rage, just simple, matter of fact. But with my body? He scoffed lightly, shaking his head. I wasn't going anywhere. A bitter chuckle escaped his lips. I was just a non-awakened kid trying to survive in the middle of a war. How could I ever become someone that could rival Aldrich? The question lingered, rhetorical. And then, Lucavion's gaze flickered slightly, something distant in his expression. And then, he murmured, I met Master. A pause. In that battlefield. The weight of that statement sat between them, unspoken. Lucavion exhaled, his smirk returning, smaller this time. And here I am. Lucavion blinked as Vitaliera hopped down from her perch, her white fur shimmering slightly under the bath's dim light. She moved with quiet grace, each step deliberate, until she stood beside him. Then, without hesitation, she placed one paw on his right shoulder, then the other on his left. And somehow, she hugged him. A cat's body wasn't made for such gestures. But Vitaliera didn't seem to care. She simply leaned into him, her warmth pressing against his bare skin, the steady pulse of her life energy threading through the air between them. Lucavion's breath hitched. You suffered a lot. Her voice was soft, not pitying, not sorrowful, just acknowledging. Lucavion closed his eyes for a moment. Yeah. There was no need to deny it. He had suffered, and for the first time in a long while, someone wasn't trying to ignore that fact. Then her next words caught him off guard. But I'm glad. His eyes flickered open. Glad. Vitaliera pressed a little closer. Glad that I met you. Lucavion chuckled, his lips curling into a smirk despite himself. You're going to make me blush. Humph. She huffed, but there was warmth in her tone. And then, that girl beat me to this, but I will not fall back. Lucavion blinked. Then, slowly his smirk widened. Oh! His voice turned playful, teasing. Are you competing now? TCH. Just be quiet and appreciate this moment. Lucavion laughed, low and rich, before resting his hand lightly against her fur. He didn't say anything else. But he didn't need to. They stayed like that for a while. Lucavion didn't move, and Vitaliera didn't pull away. The warmth of her presence wasn't just physical. It settled somewhere deeper, somewhere beyond the lingering aches of his body, beyond the memories that still clung to the edges of his mind. For once, he allowed himself to just exist. No battles, no burdens, just this moment. Then, after a long pause, Vitaliera finally spoke. Now that you've gotten your revenge, what are you planning to do? Lucavion's lips curled, his smirk returning with an easy, familiar confidence. He mused, tilting his head slightly. That's an important question, isn't it? Vitaliera just watched him, waiting. Lucavion exhaled slowly, stretching his arms before resting them against the stone. It's time, he murmured, to fulfill the promise I made to Master. Silence. Then, Vitaliera's ears twitched. And that is? Lucavion's smirk widened, mischief flickering through his dark eyes. He took a slow breath, and then, without hesitation, here I come, Academy of Arcanes. His voice echoed through the bath, loud, dramatic, completely unbothered by the sheer absurdity of it. Vitaliera blinked. Then, TFF. She snorted. Then she laughed. A bright, genuine sound, filled with exasperation but undeniably warm. You're ridiculous. Lucavion grinned. And you're welcome. Vitaliera just shook her head, tail flicking in amusement. You better not embarrass yourself. Lucavion leaned back, closing his eyes. Oh, don't worry. If I do, I'll make sure it's spectacular. Vitaliera sighed, but her smile lingered. Then Lucavion looked down, checking his reflection from the surface of the bathroom water. With this, he thought as he looked at the line over his right eye, there is no need for you anymore. And just like that, the one chapter of the story met its end. End of the volume 4. A/N This was such a long volume. I must apologize for the pacing issue, as while writing the past 100 chapters especially, I didn't want to cut any part of the dialogues at all, since I wanted them to come as natural and complete as possible. But one must also understand that the build-up with the Duke was one of the biggest build-ups for the story, since it will have a huge effect on the future. Also, Aeliana as a character was so complex to write that it was such a challenge to write her as organically as possible, and I really put a lot of thought behind her thinking process and past feelings and everything. And adding this to how she clashes with Lucavion's character, it was challenging to write. Now, we will follow with side stories to catch up what the others were doing. It is time to tie some loose ends. Your favorite heroine needs to appear again. Chapter 597, Disciple. The wind howled through the mountains, sweeping through the jagged cliffs and curling around the ancient stone formations that had withstood the passage of centuries. The sky was painted in deep shades of twilight, the sun barely clinging to the horizon, casting a golden glow over the rugged terrain. And in the midst of it all, Aeliana sat atop a small, weathered boulder, perfectly still, her legs crossed, her hands resting against her lap. Her amber eyes were shut, her breathing slow, measured. But she wasn't just meditating. She was accumulating. The mana around her was thick, heavy, alive. It pulsed in the air, invisible threads of energy weaving through her veins, coiling deep within her core. She could feel it, like a slow, powerful current, drawn in with every breath, refined with every exhale. It settled inside her, layered upon itself, growing denser, more controlled. The process was delicate. If she was too hasty, if she tried to force it, she could disrupt the natural flow, strain her core, and undo weeks of progress in an instant. But she had long since learned patience. Her thoughts drifted, back to her father's study, to that night when she had been dragged away without so much as a farewell. Months. It had been months since she last saw Lucavion, since she last heard his infuriatingly smooth voice, since she last felt the warmth of his presence, the ridiculous arrogance in his words, the way he always somehow managed to get under her skin, only to soothe her irritation a moment later. Is he at the academy now? The thought pressed at the edges of her mind, but she pushed it away. Focus. She needed to focus. She inhaled deeply, allowing the mana to settle further, to sink deeper into the foundation of her being. You are doing really well. Aeliana's eyes snapped open. A voice, faintly amused, utterly at ease, drifted from her left. Her gaze flickered toward the source, and sure enough, there he was, an elderly man, draped in robes that had clearly seen better days, his graying beard reaching down to his chest, wild strands of silver hair sticking out in random directions as if he had forgotten what a comb was. His wrinkled hands were tucked lazily into his sleeves, and his eyes, clouded with age yet sharp as ever, held the glint of a man who was far more alive than his years suggested. Aeliana sighed. "Tch. You." The old man grinned. "Me." Aeliana exhaled through her nose. "What do you want?" "Ah. Such hostility." The man tilted his head, stroking his beard with exaggerated thoughtfulness. "Shouldn't you be more respectful to your esteemed teacher?" Aeliana gave him a look. "I would be, if my esteemed teacher wasn't so irritating." The old man cackled, completely unfazed. "Ha! That's the spirit." Aeliana fought the urge to roll her eyes. This man, this eccentric, impossible old man. For months, he had been the one guiding her training, instructing her on the finer details of mana refinement, of core expansion, of pushing her limits while maintaining control. And while she could begrudgingly admit that his methods were effective, he was also an absolute menace to deal with. One moment, he was an insightful master, offering precise guidance and wisdom. The next, he was making terrible jokes, dodging serious conversations, or deliberately making her life harder just to amuse himself. Aeliana pressed a hand to her temple. "If you have something to say, say it." The old man hummed, shifting his weight onto one foot. Impatient as ever, Aeliana exhaled sharply. "You're the one who interrupted my training." "True, true," he mused. Then, without warning, he flicked his fingers. and a sudden burst of mana struck the boulder beneath her. Eliana's instincts flared. With a sharp inhale, she gathered her mana in an instant, steadying herself even as the rock beneath her shook. But she didn't fall, didn't even waver. The old man grinned. Not bad. Eliana's eye twitched. Do you enjoy testing my patience? The old man cackled again. You're finally catching on. Eliana sighed, though she was not the only one. The old man also let out a heavy sigh, stretching his arms with an exaggerated groan before plopping down onto the rocky ground beside her. His robes crumpled around him like a pile of discarded cloth, and for a brief moment, he looked less like a revered master and more like some homeless wanderer who had mistakenly found himself on a mountain peak. Eliana closed her eyes for a second, inhaling deeply. Patience. Breathe. If she let herself get irritated by every one of his antics, she wouldn't get anything done. The old man, for his part, studied her with that ever-present twinkle in his sharp, aging eyes. Let's talk about your little condition. Eliana cracked one eye open. Condition. He stroked his beard, nodding sagely as if he were some profound philosopher. Yes, yes, the strange case of Eliana Thaddeus. Quite the anomaly you are. Eliana sighed. What now? Well, the old man drawled. It's not every day that someone wakes up from a lifelong illness and suddenly finds themselves at the peak of one-star cultivation. Eliana stilled. That again. It wasn't the first time he had brought this up. And truth be told, she had noticed. Before she had fallen ill, back when she had been just a child, her mana core had barely touched the threshold of 1 star. She had been progressing at a standard rate. Nothing extraordinary, nothing out of the ordinary. Then the sickness took over and everything stopped. She had spent years bedridden, weak, unable to advance, unable to so much as lift a training sword. And then, she was cured. And not only had she regained her strength, her mana had already reached the very peak of 1 star, like it had been growing somewhere else while she had been trapped in her body. The old man tapped his fingers against his knee. You didn't notice? Eliana scoffed. Of course I did. He grinned. Good. That means you're not completely dull. Eliana exhaled through her nose. Are you actually going to explain something? Or are you just going to sit there enjoying your own voice? The old man cackled. A little of both, honestly. Eliana resisted the urge to shove him off the cliff. He leaned back against his elbows, glancing up at the sky. Here's what I think, girl. That mana, your core, it's not new. It's old. Ancient, even. He tapped his temple. Something was growing inside of you all those years, even while your body was wasting away. Eliana frowned. That's impossible. If I was cultivating mana while I was sick, I should have felt it. Should you have? The old man mused. Or were you simply not able to perceive it? Eliana's fingers twitched. The idea was unsettling. That something had been building inside her without her knowing, without her being aware. But she pushed the thought away. So? She asked, tilting her head. What does that mean for my training? The old man smirked. It means we have a foundation, a very strong one. And if you stop being so stiff, we can actually start working on refining that monstrous core of yours. Eliana huffed. Fine. The old man clapped his hands together, sitting up straighter. Since you're a Thaddeus, naturally, you've been practicing the Storm Sovereign's Dominion, yes? Eliana nodded. The Storm Sovereign's Dominion, a quasi-legendary cultivation method passed through generations of the Thaddeus bloodline. It was not merely a technique, it was a bond, a command over the ocean itself. The sea bent to its practitioners, the storms yielded to them. It was what had allowed the Thaddeus family to dominate the Empire's naval forces, to rule the waters as if they were an extension of their own bodies. The technique itself was brutal. Unlike other elemental cultivation paths, which relied on harmony and slow mastery, the Storm Sovereign's Dominion was sheer, unrelenting willpower. There was no guiding the mana like a gentle stream. There was only dominance. The practitioner had to seize the mana like a raging tide, wrestle it into submission, bend it beneath their control. They had to command the elements, not simply coexist with them. And if they failed, Then the mana would consume them instead. Aliana had spent months breaking herself against this method, forcing her body to withstand the sheer weight of it, strengthening her core to endure the raw force of the storms. The old man grinned, as if sensing her thoughts. Good, good. Then let's see how much you've improved. Aliana exhaled, closing her eyes once more. She reached inside herself, into the deep, roiling depths of her core. The moment Aliana reached into her core, she felt it. A tide of power roiling, waiting. The mana within her was vast, a deep reservoir that had been lying dormant for years, growing in silence. She exhaled slowly, commanding it to move, and it obeyed. A soft, electric hum filled the air as mana surged outward, coating her skin. It wrapped around her like a second layer of existence, a tangible force that clung to every fiber of her being. Her body tingled, the power thrumming beneath her skin, resonating with the very rhythm of her breath. It was controlled, contained, exactly what a one-star awakened was supposed to achieve. But then, something else stirred. Deep beneath the surface of her core, a ripple. A force older than her, older than the illness that had plagued her, older than the mere human limits she had once believed in. Aliana inhaled sharply as a pulse of mana, ancient, untamed, lashed against her consciousness. It wasn't wild in the way a storm raged or how the sea roared. It was something different, something she did not yet fully understand. Her breath stilled. Submit. Once again she started trying. The same process. She did not beg. She commanded. The mana bucked, resisting, like a beast unaccustomed to a master's hand. In this part she had been failing for the whole past days. Remember what I taught you, Aliana. But this time she knew. She was close. Talk. Just then she felt it. A sharp wind kicked up around her as the force inside her folded, merging with her core, intertwining with her like a current finally given direction. She gasped. For a moment, it was like she could feel everything. The moisture in the air, the weight of the clouds above, the way the distant wind tugged at the trees along the mountain path. It was intoxicating. Power surged through her limbs, her breath syncing with the rhythm of the mana inside her, until a crackling sound echoed around her. The old man, who had been silently observing, let out a low whistle. Ooh-hoo! A wide, knowing grin stretched across his face, eyes glinting with unmistakable amusement. Such a talent. Chapter 598. Prisoner. The scent of parchment and ink filled the air, the steady flicker of candlelight casting elongated shadows against the towering stacks of documents. Duke Thaddeus sat at his desk, golden eyes scanning the latest trade reports with measured precision. His fingers tapped idly against the polished wood as he absorbed the numbers, the steady flow of profits, the shifting balance of power in the region. Months had passed since the Kraken. Months of political maneuvering, trade disruptions, and countless hours spent repairing the damage, both physical and diplomatic. At first, it had been chaos. The sea routes had become treacherous, not because of the Kraken itself, it was gone after all, but because of fear. Merchants hesitated, investors pulled out, and the economy wavered under the weight of uncertainty. A Kraken was no ordinary sea monster. It was a force of nature, a calamity that had reshaped the very foundation of trade and security in the region. Even with its death, people had hesitated to believe it was truly gone. For the first few months, distrust ruled the markets. The whispers had been relentless. Was it really dead? What if another one appears? What if the Duke had merely repelled it and not slain it? And so business had slowed. But now, Thaddeus exhaled, his sharp gaze shifting to a different document. The latest financial report. It was undeniable things had stabilized. Trade routes were running smoothly once more, exports had resumed at full capacity, and most importantly, profits were steadily climbing. Because word had spread, the Kraken was dead, and he had slain it, or rather, that was what the world believed. Thaddeus' fingers paused against the parchment. Lucavion, that boy had been the one to deal the finishing blow, the one who had thrown himself into the heart of the storm and torn the beast asunder. But he had refused the credit. Thaddeus had expected it, in a way. Lucavion had always been an anomaly, someone who moved unpredictably, who never seemed to care for status or recognition. When the time came to declare victory, he had simply shrugged it off. "Give the credit to you, Mr. Duke." Lucavion had said it so casually, as if it meant nothing. Thaddeus had been forced to step forward in his place. At first, it had felt like a burden, a necessary political move, but one that invited more attention than he would have preferred. Yet now, as he looked at the rewards, stability, power, an economy that was growing stronger than before, he couldn't deny the results. The world needed a name to rally behind. And whether he had intended it or not, Lucavion had given him that name. Thaddeus exhaled through his nose, setting the parchment aside. His eyes flickered toward the sealed letters stacked neatly at the corner of his desk. Letters from nobles, investors, foreign diplomats. They all wanted the same thing, to be in the good graces of the man who had slain the Kraken. A lesser man might have reveled in this newfound prestige. But Thaddeus? He merely found it tedious. He reached for his silver bell and rang it once. Within moments, the door opened, and Lysander entered, ever composed, ever efficient. "My lord," the butler greeted with a bow. Thaddeus gestured to the letters. "Sort them. Priority to trade partners and military alliances. The rest can wait." Lysander nodded, stepping forward to collect the documents. As he did, the butler's gaze flickered to the Duke's face. A subtle shift in his expression, so small that most wouldn't notice. "You seem deep in thought, my lord," Lysander observed. Thaddeus did not respond immediately. His fingers tapped once more against the polished wood, the faint, rhythmic sound filling the silence. Then, with deliberate ease, he stood. Lysander did not comment as his lord pushed back his chair, the weight of his presence shifting the air in the study. The golden glow of candlelight flickered across his features, catching on the sharp line of his jaw, the cold gleam of his narrowed gaze. The Duke exhaled slowly, as if shaking off the weight of the reports, the trade routes, the politics. Yet something in his stance remained taut, coiled with a quiet, restrained energy that had not been there moments before. "I will be going out," Thaddeus said at last, his voice even measured. Lysander's brows lifted, ever so slightly. The Duke rarely left his study for anything short of necessity. And yet, the way he spoke, so clipped, so final, left no room for questioning. The butler inclined his head. "Shall I have the guards prepare an escort, my lord?" Thaddeus shook his head. "No." Lysander hesitated for only a fraction of a second before bowing once more. "Understood." Without another word, Thaddeus strode past him, his boots striking against the marble floors with a steady, unhurried rhythm. The corridors were silent at this hour. Most of the staff had already retired for the night, save for the night watch, whose patrols passed in disciplined intervals. The flickering sconces lining the walls cast long, wavering shadows, stretching and shifting with every step he took. But Thaddeus did not waver. He knew exactly where he was going. The scent of damp stone greeted him first. The air was colder here, far removed from the warmth of the estate above, from the polished halls and gilded chambers where power was wielded with ink and whispered alliances. Here, power was far simpler. It was the weight of chains, the bite of silence, the slow, inevitable descent into irrelevance. Thaddeus descended the final steps, his posture unchanging even as the air thickened with the scent of dust and iron. The guard stationed at the entrance straightened immediately at his approach, the man's expression unreadable beneath his helmet. "My lord." A crisp salute. "Shall I announce your arrival?" "No need." Thaddeus' voice cut through the dim space like a blade. "Open it." The guard hesitated for only a moment before nodding, reaching for the heavy iron key at his belt. With a practiced motion, he unlocked the door, the sound of grinding metal echoing through the chamber. With a dull thud, the door creaked open. Thaddeus stepped inside. She was waiting for him. Even in the dim torchlight, her silver-blue eyes gleamed, sharp and steady. She sat on the simple wooden bench provided to her, not slumped, not defeated, but poised. as if she were merely an observer in all of this, as if she had been expecting this moment all along. The chains around her wrists and ankles did little to diminish her presence. If anything, they only added to the surreal image of her bound, yet utterly composed. Madalena did not move as he approached, did not speak, only watched, and for the first time since her imprisonment, since her entire world had shattered beneath the weight of her own actions, Duke Thaddeus finally looked at her, truly looked at her, the woman he had once trusted above all else, the woman who had, in her own twisted way, claimed to have done everything for him, the woman who had tried to erase his daughter, and despite the cold fury simmering beneath his skin, despite the quiet, seething weight of betrayal pressing against his ribs, his voice, when he finally spoke, was calm. The reason for his calm was simple. It had been months since he last stood here. Months since he had left her fate in Aliana's hands. At the time, it had felt like the right decision. No, it had been the right decision. His daughter, the one Madalena had wronged most, was the only one with the right to pass judgment. And yet, now, with Aliana away, sharpening herself in training, growing beyond the shadow that had once bound her, Madalena remained. Left here, forgotten by all but time itself. Thaddeus let his gaze settle on her, his golden eyes unreadable. Madalena held his stare without flinching, her silver blue eyes as steady as they had ever been. Not broken, not pleading. She had always been a woman of conviction, and even in chains that much had not changed. "I did not come to grant you freedom," Thaddeus said at last. His voice was even unwavering. "Your life no longer rests in my hands." A statement, not a threat. Fact, not a judgment. Madalena did not react. Of course, she already knew this. He had not come to decide anything. So why had he come? The silence between them thickened, not with tension, but with something heavier, something unspoken. Finally, Thaddeus exhaled, shifting his stance slightly, his hands clasping behind his back. "Yet, I find myself here." A flicker of something passed through Madalena's gaze, there and gone in an instant. Curiosity. She did not voice it, but she was listening. That, at least, had not changed. Thaddeus studied her, as if searching for something. An answer he had not yet found within himself. Then, at last, he spoke. "Aliana has left for her training." Madalena's expression did not shift. Not at first. But then her lips parted, just slightly. Not in shock. Not in relief. Just quiet understanding. "You are here," she murmured, "because you are curious." Not a question. A certainty. Thaddeus did not confirm nor deny it. But she was right. He was curious. Not about the past. No, he understood that well enough. Not about her guilt. He had already passed judgment on that long ago. But about something else. Something more fundamental. Something he had not allowed himself to ask before. Slowly, Thaddeus stepped forward, closing the distance between them. "You claimed you did this for me." Madalena's breath was steady. "You claimed it was for the dukedom." Still, she did not waver. Thaddeus' gaze sharpened. "Then tell me." His voice lowered, golden eyes boring into hers. "What did you expect to happen?" The words lingered, cutting through the still air, demanding something deeper than the justifications she had given before. Did she believe he would accept it? Did she believe Aliana would simply disappear, that the weight of her absence would not leave its mark? Did she think, even for a second, that she would replace her? Madalena exhaled softly, tilting her head ever so slightly. And then, for the first time since he had stepped into this room, she smiled, a small, knowing smile. And she said, without hesitation, "I expected you to move forward." Chapter 599, Protagonist. The air hummed with energy, thick with the raw presence of magic. In the dim glow of a single floating orb of light, Alara sat cross-legged at the center of her room, her hands resting lightly on her knees, palms upturned as mana curled around her in slow, deliberate waves. The frost coiling from her fingertips spread outward, crackling softly as the temperature in the room plummeted. The zone of chill wavered, and then it cracked. A thin, hairline fracture split the frozen air around her, a jagged line of disruption in what should have been a seamless barrier of mana. Elara inhaled sharply, her brow furrowing. Again, she had been at this for hours, refining her mana control, pushing herself deeper into cultivation. But no matter how much she focused, no matter how precisely she wove her power, something always felt off. Her fingers curled slightly, tightening into fists before she exhaled and opened her eyes. Her room was the same chaotic mess as ever. The enormous library of books that lined the shelves, some stacked neatly, others toppling over in precarious piles. Spilled onto the floor, pages marked and dog-eared from her relentless research. The desk, covered with scattered notes and half-written theories, bore the marks of countless late nights spent poring over spellcraft, trying to refine her techniques. In the corner, old mana crystals, now drained of energy, sat piled in a heap, discarded after experiments gone wrong. And yet, even amidst the disorder, this place was home. Elara let out a slow breath, her eyes shifting toward the window. Outside, beyond the cold stone walls of the tower, the night stretched endlessly, stars glimmering in the sky like frozen shards of light. Her chest tightened. It had been 6 months since she had left Stormhaven. Since she had been forced to leave, she pressed her lips together, forcing herself to shake the thought away. Focus. She couldn't afford distractions. Not now. She had work to do. She had to get stronger. Shifting her focus, she raised a hand. The chilled air around her stirred once more as she guided the mana inwards, compressing it, refining it. The zone of chill reformed around her, dense and sharper this time, colder than before. Crack. Elara's breath hitched as another fracture formed in the mana field, this time larger. Her irritation flared. Why couldn't she stabilize it? She had mastered this before, so why now, after everything, was it breaking apart? Her heart pounded as she clenched her teeth, pushing the mana back into place. But it was no use. The ice cracked again. It wasn't her technique that was unstable. It was her. Her core was off balance. Her mana reacting to something beneath the surface, something she hadn't been able to name yet. And she knew exactly when it had started. Her focus, her resolve, her determination. It should all be the same as before. And yet, the more she cultivated, the more she felt it. The emptiness. She scowled, shutting her eyes tightly as she released the mana all at once. The room thawed slightly, though the chill remained. Her shoulders sagged, frustration curling in her gut. She knew what this feeling was. A flicker of space twisted beside her, and before the mana even settled, a figure stood in its place. Effortless, silent, as if the universe itself had merely rearranged to accommodate her arrival. Elara barely flinched. At this point, she had grown accustomed to it. Her master had never been one for conventional entrances. If anything, Elara was surprised she hadn't appeared in a more theatrical manner, maybe descending from the ceiling or stepping out from her own reflection in the window. "Master," Elara greeted, not bothering to rise from her seated position. Her voice was steady, composed, though the faint frustration from earlier still lingered in her tone. Evelyn Dracott, the Archmage of the Azure Tower, stood with an air of unshaken amusement, her deep indigo robes flowing lightly despite the lack of wind. The brim of her pointed hat tilted just enough to shadow part of her face, but her sharp, knowing eyes gleamed beneath it. "Ah, my little apprentice," Evelyn mused, tapping her chin as she surveyed the frozen air still cracking from Elara's failed cultivation attempt. "Breaking things again, I see." Elara's eye twitched. "It's not broken," she muttered, adjusting her posture. "It's unstable." Evelyn chuckled, stepping forward without a care as the remnants of the frost dissolved at her feet. "Unstable, Is that what we're calling it now?" Elara exhaled through her nose, choosing not to dignify that with a response. Instead, she gestured vaguely toward her scattered notes, the layers of research she had been compiling. "I've been trying to refine my mana flow, but you're failing." Evelyn finished the sentence for her, her lips curving into a small, knowing smirk. Elara scowled. "I didn't say that. You didn't have to." The older mage flicked her wrist lazily, and in response, the lingering mana in the room shifted. A soft glow pulsed through the space as if reacting to her presence, her mere will enough to command it. Elara bit the inside of her cheek. This was the difference between them. No matter how much she trained, no matter how many spells she refined, standing next to Evelyn was like standing next to an unshakable force of nature. The Archmage turned her piercing gaze on her, and for the first time, her amusement faded, replaced with something quieter, more knowing. "You're distracted," she said simply. Elara stiffened. No excuses." Evelyn cut in, waving a finger. "No clever rebuttals. No misplaced defiance." She tilted her head. "You know I'm right." A cold lump settled in Alara's throat, and she looked away. Silence stretched between them for a long moment. Evelyn didn't push her. She never did, not in this way. She simply waited, patient as always. Elara clenched her fists, then exhaled. "I thought I had control over it." Evelyn's gaze softened, just slightly. "You did," she said. "But you left something behind in that city." Alara's breath hitched, her mind flashing unbidden to him. To that battlefield, to the way the vortex had swallowed him whole, to the silence that followed. "You're losing yourself in the questions, aren't you?" Evelyn murmured, her voice quieter now. "Wondering if you could have done something differently. Wondering if it was your fault." Elara said nothing, but she didn't need to. Evelyn's gaze didn't waver, her piercing eyes locking onto Elara with the weight of something far more than simple observation. It was as if she was peering through her, dissecting every thought, every hesitation buried beneath the surface. "There are things in this world you cannot control, Elara," Evelyn said at last, her voice carrying an unusual softness beneath the usual sharp edge. "Sometimes, no matter how much effort you put in, how much strength you gather, how much you prepare, fate simply takes its own course." Alara's breath caught slightly, but she didn't reply. There was nothing to say. She knew that. She had lived that. Her master's words were nothing more than a confirmation of what she had already been forcing herself to accept. That sometimes, despite everything, you still lost. That you were still powerless. Still weak. Elara clenched her fists at her sides, her nails biting into her palm. "But," Evelyn continued, stepping closer, "that is not your problem right now." Elara lifted her gaze at that, her brow furrowing. "You are on the verge of breaking through to 5-star, Evelyn stated, a note of quiet finality in her voice. "But you are holding yourself back." Elara stiffened. She knew that. She had felt it. The way her magic surged erratically, the way her mana control was just slightly off balance. The way her instincts screamed that she was close, so close, to stepping into something greater, but something inside her refused to take that step. It wasn't just a mental block. It was doubt. Lingering emotions she hadn't yet let go of. Evelyn studied her carefully before exhaling through her nose in mild exasperation. "Well," she said, "we will deal with that soon enough." Elara tilted her head slightly, sensing a shift in the conversation. "What do you mean?" "Get ready," Evelyn said simply. Elara frowned. "Ready for what?" Evelyn's smirk returned, but there was something sharper behind it, something firm and immovable. "The academy is about to start," she said. "And you are enrolling." Silence. Elara blinked once, then twice. "What?" she said, her voice flat, as if she had misheard. Evelyn's smirk widened just slightly, her sharp eyes glinting with something knowing. Something that made Alara's irritation spike before she even said the words. "Did you forget the time?" Evelyn asked, her tone laced with amusement. "I seem to recall you being quite excited for the academy." "Don't tell me." She tilted her head, tapping a finger against her chin. "One single man changed your view of life." Elara snapped her gaze toward her, her jaw tightening as something hot and instinctive flared in her chest. "That's..." She cut herself off, forcing herself to exhale sharply, pressing her lips into a thin line. No, she wouldn't let herself be baited. But had she truly lost track of time? Her thoughts spun as realization hit her like a bucket of ice water. It had been months. She had buried herself so deeply in cultivation, in pushing her magic to the limit, that the days had blurred together. She had started this at early 4-star, and now she was on the very edge of breaking through to 5-star. It had been fast. Faster than most mages could ever dream of. And yet, she had stalled. Her body was ready. Her mana was surging, screaming to evolve. But she couldn't step forward. Not yet. Her doubts, her emotions, had kept her locked in place. She knew that. She hated that. Alara inhaled deeply, regaining her composure. Her lips curled into something like a smile, but it was cold, distant. Her eyes dark with something unreadable. "Of course not, Master," she said smoothly. "I haven't forgotten why I'm here. The Grand Academy, the center of excellence. The place where nobility and the most talented of magic users gathered. The place where her targets resided. Adrian, Isolde, the people who had cast her aside, who had ruined her life, who had stolen everything from her. This was the very reason she had trained. The reason she had forced herself to grow stronger, to climb, to survive. Nothing, not even a single man, was going to change that." Evelyn observed her for a long moment, her smirk curving into something softer. "Good," she said simply, folding her arms behind her back. "Because I expect results, Alara. If you're going to the academy, then you will be the strongest in your class. I have no interest in watching my apprentice waste her time." Alara's grip on her emotions tightened. Waste her time? No. She would not waste a second. She would take back everything. And if her doubts still clung to her, she would bury them in ice. Chapter 600, Pink Night. The ground trembled beneath the thundering hooves of the charging warhorses. A woman rode at the front, her armor catching the light in gleaming flashes of silver and steel. Her dark cloak billowed behind her, snapping against the wind as she led the charge, a blade drawn and ready in her hand. The knights at her back followed without hesitation, their polished armor forming a sea of steel and determination. Dust rose in thick clouds from the earth as they advanced, their war cries building into a deafening roar. Ahead, the enemy knights formed their lines, shields locked, spears angled forward. The battlefield stretched wide, open terrain with nowhere to hide. Only steel, skill, and fury would determine the victor. The woman did not slow, her focus narrowing to the line of enemies before her. Her grip on the reins was steady, her warhorse responding with a powerful surge as they closed the distance. "Shields up! Brace for impact!" A voice from the opposing ranks bellowed. She raised her sword high, her voice cutting through the chaos like a blade through flesh. "Forward!" The force of knights behind her roared in response. "Yes, Captain Valeria!" The impact came in a collision of bodies and steel. Horses reared, metal clashed, and cries of pain mixed with the brutal symphony of war. Valeria struck first, her sword carving through an enemy's raised shield, the force of the blow sending the knight staggering back. Another came at her from the left. She twisted, parrying the downward strike with ease before driving her blade forward, slipping between the weak points in his armor. A spear thrust toward her side. She leaned, letting the tip scrape against her pauldron, then wrenched the weapon from the knight's grasp with a sharp flick of her wrist. He had no time to react before she drove her boot into his chest, knocking him off his horse. All around her, the battle surged, steel meeting steel in a brutal dance. Her knights pushed forward, breaking the enemy's formation with relentless force. Blood stained the earth beneath them, the scent of sweat and iron thick in the air. Valeria did not slow. She was the tip of the spear, the force that would drive through the enemy line. A knight clad in crimson armor locked eyes with her from across the chaos. His stance low, his great sword raised in challenge. The knight in crimson armor urged his warhorse forward, his great sword gleaming under the overcast sky. His movements were controlled, precise. He was no reckless fool swinging blindly into the fray. He was calculating, watching her, measuring her stance. Valeria's grip tightened on her sword as she met his charge, boots braced in the stirrups. Their warhorses surged toward each other, pounding across the battlefield. The moment they came within striking distance, The knight swung first, his great sword carving a brutal arc toward her side. Shng. Valeria twisted her upper body, the blade whistling just past her armor. She countered with a swift cut toward his exposed gauntlet. Clang! He parried, the impact jarring through her arm. Their weapons clashed again, steel on steel, ringing out over the chaos. Peak 4-star. He's skilled, but predictable. She feinted to his left, baiting his parry, then snapped her wrist, reversing her blade's momentum in a tight, deceptive cut. Shng. The tip of her sword nicked the Crimson Knight's shoulder, slicing through the leather straps securing his pauldron. It loosened but did not fall. He grunted, shifting his grip. Instead of retreating, he drove his warhorse into hers, using sheer weight to throw her off balance. Thud! Valeria lurched as the impact rocked her seat, her horse snorting in protest. The knight capitalized, raising his greatsword overhead for a downward strike meant to split her helm in two. She let go of her reins. As the blade came down, she leaned back, almost parallel to the saddle, the tip of his sword missing her face by inches. Whoosh! As soon as it passed, she snapped upright and lashed out with her own blade. Shng. Her sword carved through the straps of his damaged pauldron, sending it clattering to the ground. The knight hissed, his movements stiffening. Valeria could see it now. His left side was exposed, his armor compromised. She pressed the attack. He'll guard his weak spot. I'll strike where he thinks I won't. She feigned another swing toward his left. He instinctively shifted his greatsword to intercept. Then, in the same instant, she dropped low, hooking her boot around his stirrup. With a sharp yank, she pulled. Crack! The knight lost his balance. His warhorse reared, and he tumbled from the saddle, crashing onto the blood-soaked earth with a thunderous thud. Without hesitation, Valeria dismounted, landing smoothly beside him. The Crimson Knight groaned, rolling onto his knees, but she was already moving. Her sword flashed downward. Clang! He barely raised his weapon in time, catching her strike. Sparks burst from the impact. He forced himself to his feet, swinging his greatsword in a wide horizontal sweep. FWSH. She ducked, the blade slicing empty air above her head. Before he could recover, she surged forward, twisting her body into a brutal upward slash. Shkk. Her sword cut across his chest plate, a deep gouge splitting the metal. He staggered, his grip faltering. Valeria seized the moment. She turned her blade, gripping it with both hands, then drove the pommel straight into his helm. Crack! The force sent him crashing to the ground. His greatsword slipped from his hands, landing with a dull thump beside him. Panting, Valeria stood over him, sword raised, eyes locked on his heaving form. Yield! She commanded, her voice like steel. The Crimson Knight groaned, coughing, his body too battered to rise. Slowly, his gauntlet hand lifted, then struck the ground once, twice in surrender. Valeria exhaled through her nose, stepping back. Valeria turned her head, her gaze shifting past the battlefield to the looming castle that stretched across the horizon. Its stone walls stood tall and imposing, the banners of the opposing forces still fluttering in defiance. Yet, even from here, she could see the tide of battle shifting in her favor. Her knights, alongside the soldiers entrusted to her by her father and Marquis Vender, had pressed deep into enemy lines. The once disciplined formations of their foes had fractured, their retreat evident in the way they desperately tried to regroup. Bodies littered the ground. Fallen knights, both friend and foe, painting the earth in streaks of crimson. And there, amidst the chaos, the enemy's strongest warrior, the 5-star vassal, had been subdued. He was on his knees, his heavy armor dented, his weapons stripped from him. Several of her knights surrounded him, their blades held steady, though they seemed wary. Even beaten, even disarmed, a warrior of his caliber was still dangerous. Valeria exhaled sharply, rolling her shoulders before glancing down at the Crimson Knight she had just bested. His breaths were labored, but he was still conscious. She could respect that, holding on to one's will even in defeat. But he was no longer her concern. She turned, scanning the battlefield until her eyes landed on a familiar figure. "Ser Orin," she called out. A knight in silver and black armor strode toward her, his sword still stained from battle. "Captain, watch over this one," she said, gesturing toward the Crimson Knight. "Make sure he doesn't try anything foolish. If he does, cut him down." Ser Orin nodded, stepping forward as two more knights moved in to assist. Valeria gave them no further glance. Her eyes were fixed on the castle. It loomed in the distance, an iron beast that still stood defiant against her assault. The main gate was closed, its drawbridge lifted, yet she could see movement along the battlements. Archers repositioning, soldiers bracing for the inevitable siege. They would not surrender easily. Valeria clicked her tongue, her fingers tightening around the reins. Another prolonged fight, another needless waste of life. She did not want that. Her warhorse moved beneath her, hooves pressing firm into the blood-stained earth as she urged it forward. The sound of battle was fading now. Her forces had gained the upper hand, and the enemy knights had begun either retreating or surrendering. Yet, even with their forces crumbling outside the walls, those within the castle still clung to their weapons. Fools! Do they even know what they're fighting for? Her gaze remained fixed on the looming fortress, her mind already set. If she could prevent further bloodshed, she would. She rode ahead, passing by her knights, ignoring the distant cries of the wounded, and stopped just outside the castle's main gate. There, she raised her sword high into the air, her voice ringing with authority. "Baron!" Her voice echoed against the towering walls. The soldiers upon the battlements stilled, their bows half-drawn, their spears held uncertainly in their hands. "Baron Godfrey!" she called again, her tone cutting through the uneasy silence that followed. "You stand accused of heinous crimes. By decree of Marquis Vender, you are under arrest."
Hello everyone. We now have a Discord server. Join us for faster updates, discussions about your favorite novels, and exclusive Discord-only content. Don't miss out. See you there. Scan the QR code on the screen or enter any of the displayed links into your browser to join our Discord.